The smoke detector started chirping at 3 a.m. You know, that awful, soul-piercing beep that comes every 45 seconds, just far enough apart to lull you into thinking it's stopped, until it stabs you in the brain again. I shot up in bed, heart pounding, convinced the world was ending. But no, it was just the cursed chirp of a dying battery. I lay there for a moment, hoping it would stop on its own. Maybe if I stayed really still, the smoke detector would feel guilty and decide to give me one more night of peace. But no. Beep. I groaned and rolled over, pulling the blanket over my head. Not now, I begged the universe. Not at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. Beep. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I could sleep through it. I could adapt, become one with the beep. But the thing about that sound is that it's scientifically designed to ruin your life. Every chirp sent a jolt of rage through my soul until I couldn't take it anymore. I kicked off the blanket and stumbled out of bed, half blind and disoriented. The apartment was cold, the kind of cold that makes everything feel worse. I found the smoke detector in the hallway, blinking its little red light, mocking me from its perch on the ceiling. Here's the thing about smoke detectors. They're always in the most inconvenient places. I don't know who decided they should be installed 8 feet in the air, but that person is my mortal enemy. I dragged a chair from the kitchen, climbed on it in my socks, and reached up toward the detector, just barely missing it by an inch. I stretched farther, wobbling precariously, trying to grab the battery cover. Beep! The sound was so loud and unexpected that I almost fell off the chair. Seriously? I hissed, glaring at the tiny plastic demon. I stepped down, cursing myself for not being taller, and realized I'd need something bigger, a stool or maybe a ladder. But I didn't own a ladder because I make poor life choices. After a quick survey of my apartment, I found the only thing tall enough, my wobbly IKEA desk chair with wheels. It was a terrible idea, horrible, but I was too tired to care. I dragged the chair into the hallway, braced it against the wall to stop it from rolling, and climbed on, knees shaking. I grabbed the edge of the smoke detector and twisted. Nothing. It was stuck, as if glued there by the gods of bad timing. Beep. The sound was relentless, drilling into my skull. I twisted again, harder this time, muttering every curse word I knew, and some I invented on the spot. Finally, it budged. The cover popped open, and the 9-volt battery dropped to the floor, bouncing once before rolling under the couch. Of course it did. The silence was immediate and glorious. I stood there for a moment, panting, feeling like I'd just won a small war. The air was still. The world was quiet. I climbed down, triumphant, and immediately stepped on something sharp. One of those mystery crumbs that somehow defies every vacuum known to man. I hobbled to the couch, crouched down, and fished around in the dark until I found the rogue battery. My fingers brushed against a few other mysterious objects. Probably lost socks, definitely some dust bunnies, but I was too tired to investigate. I shoved the battery back into the smoke detector, praying it would cooperate. When I climbed back onto the wobbly chair to click the cover shut, I felt like I was performing in Cirque du Soleil. I twisted the cover until it snapped into place, climbed down, and waited. Nothing. No beep. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I glanced at the clock. 3:27 a.m., too late to feel accomplished, too early to feel sane. I dragged the chair back to the kitchen, crawled into bed, and tried to will myself to sleep. But sleep is tricky after something like that. I lay there, wide awake, adrenaline still pumping from the battle with the smoke detector, my mind spinning uselessly. That's the thing about moments like this. They're small, stupid problems, but they come at you when you're least prepared. And instead of just fixing the problem and moving on, you lie there wondering if maybe the smoke detector is a metaphor for everything else in your life that's quietly falling apart. Eventually, I gave up on sleep and scrolled through my phone, hoping to tire my brain out. I ended up on YouTube, watching videos I didn't care about, how to clean grout, the history of toast, some guy building a log cabin from scratch. And then, for no reason at all, I started looking up articles on how smoke detectors actually work. I learned that they chirp because the battery voltage drops below a certain threshold. Makes sense. What doesn't make sense is why they only ever die in the middle of the night. By the time I finally drifted off, it was almost 5 a.m., And of course, the second I fell asleep, my alarm went off, jerking me awake like a slap to the face. I hit snooze 5 times before dragging myself out of bed, feeling like a shadow of a person. I shuffled into the kitchen, made the saddest cup of coffee ever, and sat at the table, staring at nothing. It was one of those mornings where you question everything, your choices, your priorities, the concept of time itself, all because of a smoke detector. I thought about texting my friend to complain about the night I'd had, but I already knew what she'd say. "It's just a battery," she'd tell me, laughing. And she'd be right. It was just a battery. But when you're up at 3 a.m., wrestling with a smoke detector, it feels like something bigger, like a test you didn't sign up for. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Work was a blur of emails and Zoom calls I barely followed, my brain operating at half speed. But at least the hallway was quiet now. No more beeping. No more existential crises disguised as home maintenance. And that night, when I finally crawled into bed, I felt an odd sense of accomplishment. Not because I'd done anything amazing, but because I'd survived. Some days, that's all you can hope for. You face the small annoyances, you wrestle with the things that beep in the night, and you keep going. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. It started out as a friendship. That's the part that makes it harder to explain. I wasn't looking for anything romantic when I met him. We were just 2 people in overlapping friend circles, always running into each other at parties, game nights, or random group dinners. He was the kind of person who could make anyone feel comfortable, a natural conversationalist, always quick with a joke, but never in a way that felt performative. We clicked almost immediately. It wasn't fireworks, not at first, just this quiet, solid connection. Like meeting someone who feels familiar, even though you've never known them before. We'd text here and there, but nothing serious. Memes, random thoughts, stupid jokes about the absurdity of adulthood. It was nice, easy, and that's exactly what I needed at the time. Then one night it shifted. We were the last 2 people left after a friend's dinner party. Everyone else had gone home, but we stayed, talking in the kitchen long after the dishes were done. He leaned against the counter, sipping a beer, while I sat on the floor with a glass of wine, feeling more comfortable than I had in months. At some point, he said, "You know, I really like being around you." His voice was soft, like he wasn't even sure if he wanted me to hear it. I looked up at him, surprised, and for the first time, I noticed how close we were, how easy it would be to reach out, to touch his hand, to cross that invisible line between friendship and something else. That's how it began. A single moment of closeness that turned into something neither of us planned. We started spending more time together, going on long walks, grabbing dinner, hanging out late into the night, just talking about life. It was organic, unforced, the kind of connection that feels like slipping into your favorite sweater. It didn't even feel like we were dating at first. It just felt like home. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped bracing for things to go wrong. I thought, maybe this is how love is supposed to feel: calm, steady, safe. But if life has taught me anything, it's that things rarely stay that simple. It started with small things. He'd cancel plans last minute, saying he was too tired or had something come up. The text that once came effortlessly started to slow down. And when we hung out, it felt different, like he was there physically, but drifting somewhere else. I try not to read too much into it, but the anxiety crept in anyway. The familiar fear that I was holding on to something that was slipping away. I told myself to give him space, to let things unfold naturally. But every time he pulled back, I felt myself clutching tighter, as if I could keep us together if I just tried hard enough. One night, we were supposed to meet for dinner, but he canceled again. "Work's been insane," he texted. "Rain check." I sat on my couch, phone in hand, staring at the message. I wanted to be understanding. I wanted to believe it was just a busy week, that things would go back to normal soon. But deep down, I knew better. I knew what this pattern meant. I'd seen it before. I tried to ignore the knot in my chest, but it kept growing, tightening with every passing day. When we did talk, it was strained, like we were trying to hold on to something that was already gone. I felt like I was standing on a cliff, watching the ground crumble beneath my feet, powerless to stop it. Finally, one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I sent him a text. "Can we talk? I feel like something's changed, and I just need to know where we stand." He didn't respond right away. I stared at my phone, heart pounding, waiting for those 3 little dots to appear. When his message finally came, it was exactly what I feared. "I care about you," he wrote, "but I don't think I'm in the right place for this right now." I read the message over and over, each word sinking deeper into my chest. It was the same story, just a different person. Someone who showed up, made me believe, and then disappeared when things got real. I wanted to scream, to tell him that if he wasn't ready, he shouldn't have started this in the first place. But what would have been the point? He'd made his decision, and nothing I said would change that. So I replied with the only thing I could muster. "Okay, take care." And that was it. Just like that, it was over. The next few days felt like moving through a fog. I went through the motions, work, errands, pretending I was fine when people asked. But inside, I was unraveling. It wasn't just the loss of him. It was the loss of everything I'd let myself believe. I'd thought this time would be different. I thought I'd finally found someone who wouldn't leave. But here I was again, standing in the wreckage of another almost relationship, wondering what I'd done wrong. The worst part wasn't the breakup itself. It was the silence that followed. He didn't ghost me, exactly, but he didn't reach out either. No text to check in, no messages saying he missed me. Just nothing. It was like I'd been erased from his life, a chapter he'd decided to skip. I kept telling myself that I'd move on, that I'd get over it eventually. But healing isn't a straight path. Some days I felt okay, like I could finally breathe again, and other days, the sadness hit me out of nowhere, sharp and unexpected, like a wave pulling me under. I hated that I still thought about him, that part of me still hoped he'd come back. But that's the thing about hope. It sticks around, even when you don't want it to. Eventually, I realized that I wasn't just mourning the loss of him. I was mourning the version of myself I'd been with him. The version that believed in love, that let her guard down, that thought maybe, just maybe, things would be different this time. It's been a few months now, and I'm still learning how to pick up the pieces. I've stopped waiting for closure, stopped looking for answers that may never come. Because the truth is, sometimes people leave, and it has nothing to do with you. Sometimes they walk away because staying is too hard, and there's nothing you can do to change that. But here's what I know now. I'll be okay. Even without him, even without the ending I hoped for, I'll be okay. Because as much as it hurts to lose someone, it hurts even more to lose yourself trying to hold on to them. So I'll keep going, one day at a time, one step at a time. And if love finds me again, I'll be ready. But this time, I'll know that no matter what happens, I am enough. On my own, just as I am. And that's a kind of peace no one can take away from me. It was the quiet moments that gave him away. Not the big things, no lipstick on the collar, no secret calls in the middle of the night. It was the way he stopped laughing at my jokes, the ones that used to make him roll his eyes but smile anyway. The way he'd sit next to me on the couch but feel a million miles away. At first, I thought we were just going through a rough patch. Every couple does, right? I told myself it was nothing, but nothing started to feel like everything. The first real clue came one night when his phone buzzed after midnight. He grabbed it so fast, like it might explode if I saw who was texting. "Who was that?" I asked, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. "No one," he mumbled, shoving the phone under his pillow. "Just work stuff." I tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. The way his voice felt like sandpaper against my nerves. "Don't make a big deal out of this," I told myself. "It's just a text." But that little voice in the back of my head whispered otherwise. He started working late more often after that. Long, unexplained nights where he'd come home smelling like a mix of cigarettes and cheap cologne. He never used to smoke. When I asked about it, he just shrugged. "Some of the guys at work smoke. It rubs off." He said it so easily, like it wasn't even worth discussing. The distance grew, stretching between us like an invisible wall. Every time I tried to reach him, it felt like grabbing at smoke. There 1 second, gone the next. "Are we okay?" I asked one night, lying next to him in bed, the room filled with the kind of silence that makes you feel lonely even when you're not alone. He sighed like I was asking too much. "You always worry too much," he said, pulling the blanket over himself and turning away from me. And that was the thing. He made me feel like the problem, like I was the one who was too needy, too insecure, too paranoid. So I stopped asking, stopped trying to bridge the gap. hoping he'd come back on his own. But he never did. The night I found out was almost uneventful. We were at a party, a casual thing with mutual friends. I went to grab a drink, and when I came back, he wasn't in the room. I wandered through the house, weaving through groups of people, until I found him outside, standing too close to someone I didn't recognize. She was laughing at something he said, leaning into him, her hand brushing his arm like they were sharing some private joke. And the way he looked at her, I knew in that moment, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was the reason for the late nights, the distant smiles, the phone kept under his pillow. I stood there for a moment, frozen, watching them from the doorway. It was surreal, like watching a scene from a movie I didn't want to be in. My heart felt heavy, sinking deep into my chest, but the anger didn't come. Not yet, just numbness, spreading through me like ice. When he finally noticed me standing there, his face changed, not with guilt, but with annoyance, like I was ruining his fun. "Oh, hey," he said too casually. I didn't need to hear the rest. "Don't," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the chatter of the party behind me. His expression flickered, just for a second, like he was trying to decide if he should lie or tell the truth. But it didn't matter. I already knew. I turned and walked away, not bothering to look back. He didn't follow me. That's the part that stings the most. Even now, he didn't even try. I went home that night, sat on the edge of our bed, and stared at the wall, feeling hollow. The apartment felt unfamiliar, like I'd woken up in someone else's life. I thought about texting him, demanding answers, but what would be the point? I had all the answers I needed. The next morning, I packed my things. No dramatic fight, no shouting, no tears, just quiet acceptance. I left a note on the kitchen counter. I hope she's worth it. It was petty, maybe, but it felt like closure in a way. He texted me that night. "Can we talk?" It wasn't what it looked like. I deleted the messages without replying. There was nothing left to say. It's been 4 months now. Some days I feel okay. Other days, the weight of it hits me out of nowhere. A song we used to listen to, a place we used to go. But every day it gets a little easier. The numbness fades, replaced by something softer, something like peace. I still wonder sometimes if he ever thinks about me, if he regrets what he did. But then I remind myself that it doesn't matter. His actions were a reflection of who he is, not who I am. And I deserve better than someone who couldn't see my worth until it was too late. The other day, a friend asked if I missed him. I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "I don't miss him," I said. "I miss the person I thought he was." And that's the truth. Because the hardest part of losing someone isn't the loss itself. It's letting go of the version of them you created in your mind. The version you loved. The version that never really existed. But I'm learning. I'm learning to love myself the way I wanted him to love me. And for now, that's enough. This one is known simply as the principal's golf cart incident. It wasn't just dumb. It was the kind of legendary stupidity that gets talked about at every reunion. And somehow, against all odds, we all survived. It started on a random Tuesday during one of those days where nobody, not the teachers, not the students, not even the janitors, wanted to be there. The vibe was off. It was too hot, everyone was bored, and half the school had mentally checked out. Which is exactly why stealing the principal's golf cart suddenly seemed like the best idea in the world. Let me explain. Our principal, Mr. Owens, was obsessed with his golf cart. He treated that thing like it was a Ferrari. It wasn't even a nice one. Just a rickety old cart that the school used for hauling cones and water coolers during football games. But Mr. Owens loved it. He drove it around campus like he was royalty, zipping from one side of the school to the other, honking at kids and waving like he was in a parade. So, naturally, someone had to steal it. That someone was my friend Lucas, a kid who somehow managed to exist in a constant state of both charm and chaos. Lucas was the kind of guy who could talk his way out of any situation, which is probably the only reason he didn't get expelled 10 times over. One minute he'd be talking to a teacher about taking responsibility, and the next he'd be chugging Mountain Dew while setting off bottle rockets in the parking lot. The idea to steal the golf cart wasn't even well thought out. We were sitting under the bleachers during lunch, half joking about ways to make the day less boring, when Lucas suddenly stood up and said, "I'm stealing the cart." At first, we thought he was bluffing, but then we saw the look in his eye. The same look he'd had the time he convinced the entire school that the lunchroom pizza was made from iguana meat. There was no stopping him. The plan was simple. Lucas would wait until Mr. Owens parked the golf cart outside the gym, which he always did during third period, hop in, and take it for a joyride around campus. 5 minutes tops, Lucas said. We'll park it back, and no one will even know it was gone. Spoiler, that's not how it went. We waited by the gym, watching from behind a row of lockers. Sure enough, right on schedule, Mr. Owens rolled up in the cart, stepped out, and went inside to do whatever it is principals do when they're not terrorizing students. The second the coast was clear, Lucas darted across the parking lot, slid into the driver's seat like a getaway driver, and hit the gas. Now here's the thing about golf carts. They look slow and harmless, but when you're a bunch of high school kids who've never driven anything more powerful than a Razor scooter, they feel like rocket ships. Lucas slammed on the pedal, and the cart lurched forward so hard we almost fell over laughing. Go, go, go! Someone shouted, as if we were robbing a bank. Lucas zoomed across campus, honking the horn like a maniac. Kids in the courtyard started cheering as he sped past them. Someone threw a half-eaten sandwich at the cart, and Lucas ducked like he was in an action movie. At one point, he did a wild, unnecessary U-turn that sent the back wheels skidding on the grass. By the time we reached the main courtyard, a full-blown crowd had gathered. People were filming on their phones, chanting Lucas, Lucas, like he was some kind of folk hero. I was running alongside the cart, laughing so hard I could barely breathe. It was the most glorious, idiotic thing I'd ever been a part of. And then, Mr. Owens came back. We saw him step out of the gym and spot his beloved golf cart speeding across the courtyard. His face went from confused to furious in about 3 seconds flat. Lucas, he bellowed, his voice carrying across the entire campus. Now, any rational person would have stopped right there, handed over the cart, and begged for mercy. But Lucas floored it. He zipped past the science building, flew over a speed bump that sent the whole cart airborne for half a second, and kept going like the gates of hell were chasing him. Mr. Owens, completely losing it, started sprinting after the cart on foot, yelling, "Get back here!" We were dying. Literal tears were streaming down our faces as we watched the principal, middle-aged, wearing dress shoes, sprinting after his golf cart like he was training for the Olympics. But the funniest part? Lucas wasn't even trying to escape. He was just doing laps around the campus, honking the horn and waving at everyone like he was on a victory tour. And that's when things went really sideways. Somehow, in the chaos, Lucas decided it would be a good idea to drive the golf cart onto the football field. To this day, I have no idea why. Maybe he thought it would be funny. Maybe he just wanted to leave his mark. Either way, he floored it toward the field, the tires squealing as he hit the grass. "OHSHIT," someone yelled. "He's going for the field." By the time Mr. Owens reached the edge of the field, it was too late. Lucas drove straight through the end zone, leaving behind 2 perfect tire tracks in the freshly mowed grass. The cheerleaders, who were practicing on the sidelines, dropped their pom-poms and started cheering for him. But then Lucas made the biggest mistake of the day. He tried to do a donut in the middle of the field. For about 2 glorious seconds, it looked like it was going to work. The cart spun in a tight circle, the crowd went wild, and Lucas was grinning like a madman. But then the back will hit a patch of mud, and the entire golf cart flipped over. Crash! The crowd went silent as Lucas tumbled out of the cart, landing flat on his back in the middle of the field. For a moment, everyone just stared, waiting to see if he was still alive. And then, out of nowhere, Lucas threw his arms in the air and yelled, "I'm okay." The entire field exploded with laughter and applause. Even the cheerleaders were clapping. Lucas, covered in mud and grass stains, stood up, dusted himself off, and gave the crowd a bow like he'd just performed Shakespeare. And then Mr. Owens tackled him. The principal hit Lucas with the kind of flying tackle you only see in football highlight reels. They both went down in a tangle of limbs and grass, with Mr. Owens yelling something about respect for school property, while Lucas just kept laughing like a lunatic. Long story short, Lucas got suspended for 2 weeks. The golf cart had to be towed off the field. and Mr. Owens banned everyone from ever setting foot on the football field again, unless properly supervised. But here's the thing, nobody stopped talking about it. The video of Lucas's golf cart joyride went viral on Instagram, and by the time he got back from his suspension, he was a legend. Teachers gave him side-eye in the hallways, but students? They treated him like royalty. And every time someone brings up the story, Lucas just shrugs and says, "Best 2 weeks of my life." And honestly, I believe him. It was the kind of night that felt heavier than it should. Too much on my mind, too little energy to make sense of it. I wasn't planning on leaving my apartment, but when I opened the fridge and found nothing except a bottle of ketchup and a block of old cheddar, I figured it was as good an excuse as any to take a walk. So I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my wallet, and headed toward the corner store. The city felt weirdly still, like the world had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person awake. When I got to the store, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting that strange, washed-out glow that made everything look a little sad. The place was empty except for the guy behind the counter, scrolling on his phone, and a middle-aged woman arguing with a vending machine in the corner. I wandered through the aisles, grabbing things without much thought: a loaf of bread, a bag of chips, some instant noodles. Things I didn't really need but knew I'd regret not having later. I was almost at the register when I saw her. Sarah. She was standing by the freezer section, holding a pint of ice cream in one hand and looking at her phone like it had just ruined her night. I stopped dead in my tracks, heart stuttering in my chest. Of all the people in all the places on a random Tuesday night at a convenience store, it had to be her. She hadn't noticed me yet, and for a second, I thought about backing out quietly, slipping away before she saw me. But something about the way she stood there, her shoulders slouched, her expression tired, made me stay. I cleared my throat. "Hey, stranger." She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if trying to place a face she hadn't seen in years. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her lips. "You've got to be kidding me." We stood there for a beat, the awkwardness stretching between us like a rubber band. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yeah," I replied, still trying to wrap my head around the coincidence. "Same." Her smile was soft, a little hesitant, like she wasn't sure if this was a good thing or not. "What are you doing here?" "Impulse grocery run," I said, holding up the bag of chips like it was a life decision I stood behind. She laughed, light, genuine, the kind of laugh that stirred something deep in my chest. "Same," she said, glancing down at the ice cream in her hand. "Didn't feel like going home yet." I nodded, not trusting myself to say the wrong thing. There was so much unspoken history between us. Memories tangled up with good intentions. Mistakes we hadn't quite figured out how to forgive. We ended up outside, sitting on the curb with our random groceries between us. She opened the pint of ice cream and offered me a spoon. "It's mint chip," she said. "Still your favorite, right?" I smiled, surprised that she remembered. "Yeah." We sat there eating ice cream straight from the container, letting the quiet of the night wrap around us. It felt easy somehow, like no time had passed, even though everything had changed. "Do you ever think about us?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft but steady. I paused, the spoon halfway to my mouth. "All the time," I admitted. She gave me a small, sad smile, like she'd been waiting to hear that but wasn't sure what to do with it now that it was out in the open. We talked after that, about the things we'd done since we last saw each other, the people we'd become in the years apart. She told me about her new job, how she'd finally started painting again, how life was good but still lonely sometimes. I told her about my work, the messes I'd made along the way, and how I still hadn't figured out how to cook anything that didn't come out of a microwave. She laughed at that, and it felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater too long. At some point, the conversation slowed, and we just sat there, watching the occasional car pass by. "It's weird, isn't it?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How people can drift apart and end up back in the same place, just like that." "Yeah," I said. "It's weird, but kind of nice." She looked over at me, her expression unreadable. "I missed you," she said, the words hanging in the cool night air like a fragile truth. "I missed you too." I whispered, feeling the weight of all the things I hadn't said over the years settle between us. For a moment, it felt like we were on the edge of something, an old story we'd abandoned halfway through, waiting to see if we were brave enough to pick it up again. But then Sarah smiled, soft and bittersweet, and I knew she felt it too, the understanding that some things can't go back to the way they were. And maybe that was okay. When the ice cream was gone and the night felt a little less heavy, she stood up and dusted off her jeans. "Want to walk me home?" she asked, her voice light, like she already knew the answer. I smiled, grabbing my bag of chips. "Yeah, I'd like that." We walked slowly, side by side, with no rush to get anywhere. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and clean, the streets glistening under the glow of the streetlights. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. Just being there, walking together through the quiet night, felt like enough. When we reached her building, she turned to me, her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket. "Thanks for tonight," she said softly. "Anytime," I replied, meaning it more than she probably realized. She gave me one last smile, a real one, the kind that made my chest ache in the best way, and disappeared through the door. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the city around me, the night feeling lighter than it had in a long time. Then I turned and started walking home, the faint taste of mint chip still lingering on my tongue. And for the first time in years, it felt like maybe, just maybe, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And for now, that was enough. It started with boredom, the kind that sneaks up on you when everything feels too routine, too predictable, and you're desperate for anything to break the monotony. I wasn't planning on going out, but the alternative was staying home, scrolling through the same apps, and wondering why my life felt like it was on repeat. So when my friend texted, "We're grabbing drinks, meet us?" I didn't think twice. I threw on my favorite jeans, something low-cut, and told myself, what's the worst that could happen? The bar was already buzzing when I arrived. It was one of those places that tries to look effortlessly cool. Mismatched furniture, neon signs, and bartenders with tattoos that probably meant more to them than they should. I ordered a drink, scanned the room, and told myself I'd stay for an hour. Just enough to show up, be social, and then disappear before things got too messy. But then I saw him. He was sitting at the far end of the bar, hunched over a drink, playing with the coaster like it was more interesting than anything else going on around him. Something about that caught my attention. Guys like him are rare in places like this. Most people come here to be seen, to shout over the music, to flirt. But he looked different, quiet, unbothered, like he was there by accident but didn't mind staying. I didn't think. I just acted. Sliding into the empty seat next to him, I gave him a little smile. "So, you having as much fun as you look like you're having?" He glanced at me, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile, but not quite. If this is fun, I've been doing it wrong. That made me laugh. It was dry, deadpan, and exactly what I needed to hear. Before I knew it, we were talking. Nothing deep, nothing profound, just easy, back and forth banter that felt like slipping into an old, comfortable sweater. He asked where I was from, what I did if I came here often. Standard small talk, but the way he asked made it feel like he actually cared about the answers. One drink turned into two. Two turned into three. Somewhere between conversations about music and travel, his hand brushed against mine, and neither of us pulled away. It was subtle, almost accidental, but that one small touch sent a spark shooting through me. I knew exactly where this was going. So did he. "Want to get out of here?" he asked, his voice low, like it was a secret meant only for me. I nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, let's go." The walk to his place felt electric. His hand found the small of my back, guiding me through the crowded streets like we were the only two people in the world. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The tension between us said everything. When we finally made it to his apartment, the door had barely closed before we were on each other, kissing, grabbing, pulling at clothes like the night might evaporate if we didn't act fast. His bed was unmade, his room a little messy, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was the way he made me feel, like for a few hours, I could forget everything else. The sex was good, not perfect, but real. The kind of sex that leaves you breathless, tangled in sheets, laughing at the absurdity of it all. For a little while, it felt like freedom, like I'd found exactly what I'd been craving, even if I didn't fully understand what that was. But mornings always tell the truth. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window, casting harsh shadows across the room. For a few blissful seconds, I stayed still, my body warm under the weight of his arm draped across my waist. It would have been easy to stay there, to close my eyes and pretend that this meant more than it did. But the heaviness in my chest told me otherwise. I knew the routine. I'd been through it enough times to recognize the signs. The thrill of the night, followed by the inevitable crash. The way everything that felt exciting under the cover of darkness turned cold and hollow in the morning light. I slid out of bed slowly, trying not to wake him. My clothes were scattered across the floor, and gathering them felt like picking up the pieces of something that never really fit together in the first place. There's always a kind of sadness in that moment. The quiet acknowledgement that whatever magic existed last night couldn't survive the daylight. He stirred as I slipped on my shoes, his voice thick with sleep. "You heading out?" I nodded, forcing a smile that felt more like an apology. "Yeah, got an early start." He blinked at me, still half asleep, and gave me a soft smile that made my heart ache for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. "Take care," he said, and I knew he meant it. "Yeah, you too." And just like that, it was over. The walk home was colder than I'd expected, the morning air biting through my coat. I wrapped it tighter around me, but it didn't help. The chill wasn't just on the outside. It was deep inside me, that familiar ache that always showed up after nights like these. I told myself it was fine, that this was what I wanted. No strings, no complications, just a night to feel alive. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, a weight I couldn't ignore. It wasn't about him. It never is. It was about the pattern. The way I kept chasing these moments, hoping they'd fill the spaces inside me that never seemed to stay full. And the way they never did. The Uber ride home was quiet, the kind of silence that forces you to sit with your thoughts, whether you want to or not. I stared out the window, watching the city wake up around me, and tried to convince myself that it didn't matter, that I'd be fine. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't fine. Not really. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and crawled into bed, not bothering to change out of last night's clothes. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and indifferent, as if daring me to figure out what I was doing with my life. I lay there, waiting for the heaviness to lift, but it didn't. It never does. I wish I could say that night was the last time, that I finally learned my lesson, stopped chasing highs that always left me feeling low. But the truth is, I'll probably do it again. Because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe one day I'll stop. Maybe I'll figure out how to want less, or how to want something real. Or maybe I'll keep going one night at a time, hoping that eventually one of these mornings will feel different. But for now, I'll just keep moving forward. One kiss, one drink, one morning after the next. The day I decided to fix my leaky faucet was the day I realized I was in over my head. It had been dripping for weeks, a slow, rhythmic plink that echoed through the apartment at night, reminding me that I wasn't as handy as I liked to think. At first, I tried ignoring it. Then I tried convincing myself that it was charming, like the soothing sound of rain, if rain were really annoying and isolated to just your sink. But after a particularly sleepless night, when the faucet seemed to drip in perfect sync with my rising frustration, I snapped. I was going to fix it, or I was going to die trying. I Googled how to fix a leaky faucet and skimmed a few articles. They all made it sound so easy. Just tighten the nut, one website said, as if I knew what nut they were referring to. Another mentioned a cartridge, which sounded more like something from a printer than a sink. But I was feeling ambitious. I told myself, how hard could it be? People fix sinks all the time. You are people. Armed with misplaced confidence, I grabbed the only tool I owned, a rusty wrench I found at the bottom of my toolbox, which was really just an old shoebox filled with IKEA Allen wrenches and loose screws. I knelt by the sink, stared at the faucet like it was my mortal enemy, and gave the handle a decisive twist. Nothing happened. No satisfying click, no tightening, just the same relentless plink, plink, plink. I tightened the nut harder, which only made it worse. Now it wasn't just dripping. It was leaking with water seeping out from places water had no business being. Cool, 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 I muttered to myself, feeling the first twinge of panic. I grabbed a dish towel and wrapped it around the faucet, as if that would magically fix the problem. It did not. The water continued to trickle defiantly, and now the towel was soaked too. It was time for Plan B. I shut off the water under the sink, feeling momentarily victorious when the faucet went quiet. I had won the battle, but the war was just beginning. Next, I tried taking the faucet apart, because obviously, the logical solution to fixing something you don't understand is to dismantle it entirely. I unscrewed a few pieces, and by unscrewed, I mean I twisted things until they fell off. Washers, tiny screws, and some kind of rubber ring clattered into the sink. I had no idea where any of them belonged, but I told myself that was a problem for later. When I finally managed to pull out the faucet's internal cartridge, something the internet had promised was very straightforward, I realized I'd made a grave mistake. The cartridge looked wrong. There were cracks in the plastic, and it felt brittle, like it would crumble if I so much as looked at it funny. I sat there, dripping wet and surrounded by disassembled faucet parts, realizing that I had no backup plan. I thought about calling a plumber, but it was Sunday, which meant emergency rates. And calling maintenance felt like admitting defeat. I was committed now, whether I liked it or not. So, naturally, I drove to the hardware store, clutching the broken cartridge like it was a rare artifact. The store was bustling, full of people who clearly knew what they were doing, unlike me. I wandered the aisles, trying to look confident, while also scanning for any sign that said help for people who shouldn't have tried this in the first place. Eventually, I found a guy in an orange vest who looked like he had seen some things. "I need one of these," I said, holding up the cartridge like a lost child presenting a broken toy. He took one look at it and shook his head. "Yeah, we don't carry that model anymore. Pretty old." Of course it was old. Why wouldn't it be? "So, what do I do?" I asked, trying not to sound desperate. He gave me a sympathetic shrug. "You could try online, or replace the whole faucet." He paused. "Replacing the faucet's not too hard." I nodded as if that were good news, but inside I was screaming. Replace the whole faucet? Was he out of his mind? I was barely qualified to change light bulbs, and now he wanted me to perform plumbing surgery? But I smiled politely, thanked him, and walked out of the store feeling both empty-handed and entirely out of my depth. Back at the apartment, I sat on the floor in front of my disassembled sink, trying to decide if I should cry, scream, or just live with a permanently broken faucet. Maybe I could start a trend, minimalist sinks, the kind that only sort of work. I imagined explaining it to guests. It's more of a conceptual faucet, really. Very chic. After about an hour of Googling faucet replacements and watching several YouTube tutorials that only made me feel worse, I realized I had exactly two options. Either put the broken pieces back together and hope for the best, or accept that my faucet was now just a glorified water sculpture. I went with option one. I pieced everything back together as carefully as someone trying to defuse a bomb, lining up washers, tightening screws, and whispering prayers to whatever gods govern home repairs. When it was finally reassembled, I took a deep breath and turned the water back on. At first, nothing happened. No leaks, no drips. I was on the verge of celebrating when plip, a single, mocking drip slid down the spout, like the faucet was reminding me that I could never truly win. But here's the thing, it was just a drip now. No more steady leak, no water pooling under the sink, just a lone, occasional drip. And honestly, I could live with that. I stepped back, wiped my hands on my already soaked towel, and let out a long, exhausted sigh. The sink wasn't perfect, but it worked, and maybe that was enough. I put away the tools, and by put away, I mean I shoved them back into the shoebox and collapsed on the couch, feeling both defeated and victorious in the weirdest way. The faucet was still a little broken, sure, but so was everything else in life. And sometimes, good enough is as good as it's going to get. I stared up at the ceiling, listening to the quiet drip of the faucet, and decided it wasn't such a bad sound after all. In fact, it was kind of comforting, like a reminder that things don't have to be perfect to be okay. You fix what you can, you live with what you can't, and you keep moving forward. And honestly, that felt like a win. The first time I tried to flirt with a barista, I accidentally ordered 5 muffins. Not on purpose, although in hindsight, it probably looked like I was trying to stockpile baked goods for the apocalypse. It started because I'd been going to the same coffee shop every Saturday for weeks, mostly out of laziness, but partly because of her. She worked the morning shift, this effortlessly cool barista with curly hair, a nose ring, and a smile that could make anyone forget how to form coherent thoughts. I'd been trying to work up the courage to talk to her for weeks, but all I ever managed was a mumbled thanks when she handed me my latte. Real smooth. This time, though, I had a plan. I was going to say something, anything to start a conversation. No more cowardly head nods. No more awkward half smiles. Just a simple, charming exchange. How hard could it be? When I got to the counter, she smiled, that smile, and said, "Hey there, what can I get you?" And that's when my brain decided to betray me. "I'll have a cappuccino," I blurted, way too fast. "And, 5 muffins. 5 muffins. What the hell, Jake?" Her eyebrows went up, but she didn't laugh. 5 muffins? That's ambitious. I could have corrected myself right there, told her it was a mistake. But for some reason, possibly panic, possibly a deep-seated fear of embarrassment, I just nodded. "Yep, 5 muffins. Big day." "Okay," she said, clearly trying to hold back a laugh. "Any specific kind? Or just a random assortment?" Surprise me," I said, immediately regretting it. Who even says that? Who walks into a coffee shop and demands a muffin surprise? She grinned as she rang up my order. "Living dangerously, huh?" "Always," I muttered, wondering if it was possible to disappear in a thin air out of sheer embarrassment. I paid for my ridiculous order and shuffled over to the pickup counter, mentally kicking myself the entire time. "Great job, Jake. You really wowed her with that muffin confidence." A few minutes later, she appeared behind the counter with a tray. Yes, an entire tray of muffins. "Here you go," she said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. 5 muffins, one of each kind. I stared at the tray, suddenly realizing the enormity of my mistake. These weren't tiny muffins. They were the jumbo, could feed a family for a week kind. "Wow," I said weakly. "That's a lot of muffin." She laughed, a bright, genuine laugh that made my heart do somersaults. "Yeah, it is. You want a bag for those?" No, I said, because apparently I was committed to my muffin disaster. "I'll just carry them." Her eyes crinkled at the corners as she watched me awkwardly scoop the muffins into my arms like a lunatic gathering fallen fruit. "Do you really love muffins?" she asked, still smiling. This was my moment. My chance to turn this whole mess into a charming story instead of a cautionary tale. "Actually," I said, holding the muffins like they were a bouquet, "I was hoping one of them could be a peace offering, in case I said anything awkward just now." Her smile widened, and for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely hopeless. "I think you're off the hook," she said. "But I'll take a muffin if you're offering." I grinned like an idiot. "Pick your favorite." "It's on me." She reached out, grabbed a blueberry muffin from the top of the pile, and gave me a playful look. "Thanks. This makes up for the weirdest order I've had all week." We stood there for a moment, both of us grinning like fools. And then, because I'm nothing if not consistent, I nearly dropped the remaining 4 muffins onto the floor. "Smooth," she teased, catching one before it could roll off the counter. "Thanks," I muttered, cradling the survivors like they were precious cargo. I think I've reached my muffin-carrying limit." She laughed again, and in that moment, I knew I had to go for it. "So," I said, shifting the muffins awkwardly in my arms, "since we've already bonded over baked goods, how about coffee sometime? Somewhere that doesn't require me to order half the bakery." She tilted her head, clearly considering it. "You know what?" she said, her grin softening. "That actually sounds nice." My heart skipped a beat. Really, she said, pulling a pen from her apron. "Here." She scribbled her number on one of the paper bags and handed it to me with a wink. "Just maybe no more muffin emergencies." I laughed, feeling a rush of relief and excitement all at once. "Deal." As I walked out of the coffee shop, juggling muffins and a phone number, I couldn't help but grin. Sure, I'd made an absolute fool of myself. But somehow, against all odds, it had worked, and honestly, those muffins were delicious. About 6 months ago, I got a gig as an overnight security guard for a construction site on the outskirts of town. It was a pretty sweet deal. Good pay for just sitting around all night, making sure no one messed with the equipment. The site was huge, an old factory being converted into luxury apartments, with cranes, scaffolding, and rows of half-finished hallways that felt more like a maze. The job was simple enough. I had to do a walkthrough of the site every couple of hours, making sure everything was in place. The rest of the time, I stayed in the little security trailer near the gate, sipping bad coffee and scrolling through my phone. It was quiet out there, miles from the nearest house or road. Too quiet sometimes. The first few nights were uneventful. Just me, the hum of the generator, and the occasional distant sound of a stray cat knocking something over. But on the fourth night, things started to get weird. It was around 2:30 a.m., deep into my shift, when I heard it, the sound of a drill. Just this low, whining hum coming from somewhere inside the unfinished building. I frowned, stood up, and grabbed my flashlight. No one was supposed to be on site after hours. All the workers were long gone, and the place should have been locked up tight. I radioed into my supervisor, but the response was just static. That was the first red flag. The radio worked fine earlier, but now, dead silence. My gut told me to stay in the trailer, but I had a job to do. So I grabbed the keys, locked the trailer behind me, and started walking toward the building. As I approached, the sound of the drill cut off abruptly, like whoever was using it knew I was coming. I stood at the entrance for a moment, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The air inside the building was stale and cold, smelling like wet concrete and rusted metal. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing down the hallways. "Anyone here?" Nothing. Just a faint creak of scaffolding shifting in the wind. I stepped inside, the sound of my boots echoing in the empty space. I kept my flashlight low, sweeping it across the unfinished walls and stacks of materials. The deeper I went, the more I felt that strange, prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I followed the corridor deeper into the building, the darkness pressing in from all sides. That's when I saw it, about 30 feet ahead, at the edge of my flashlight's beam. A shadow. It was just standing there, motionless at the end of the hallway. I stopped dead in my tracks, heart hammering in my chest. For a moment, I thought it was one of the workers, maybe someone who stayed behind, messing with me. But something about the way the shadow stood, too still, too unnatural, sent chills down my spine. "Hey!" I called out, gripping my flashlight tighter. "You're not supposed to be here." The shadow didn't move. It just stood there watching, and then it smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, the edges of the mouth curling upward far beyond what should have been possible. And the worst part? I could see the teeth, rows of them, small and sharp, glinting faintly in the beam of my flashlight. My stomach flipped. Every instinct I had screamed run, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. Then, without a sound, the shadow took a step toward me. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight, and that's when I heard it footsteps. Not mine, the shadow's. They were heavy and deliberate, slapping against the cold concrete floor as it moved closer. I turned on my heel and bolted, my heart pounding in my throat. I ran through the dark hallways, flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. The air felt heavier, thicker with every step. I could hear the footsteps behind me, slow and steady, matching my pace no matter how fast I ran. I reached the main staircase and sprinted down 2 steps at a time, barely keeping my balance. I glanced over my shoulder once, just once, and wished I hadn't. It was following me. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet with tangled strings. It ran with a strange, lurching gait, its mouth still stretched into that awful smile. And those teeth, those endless, gleaming rows of teeth, seemed to shimmer in the dark. I hit the ground floor and didn't stop running until I reached the trailer. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the keys. For a moment, everything was silent. Just the sound of my own breathing, the hum of the generator, and the pounding of my heart in my ears. Then I heard it. Top, top, top. Something was tapping on the trailer window. I didn't want to look. I knew what I'd see, but I couldn't help myself. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. It was there, pressed against the glass, its face too close, its eyes too wide, and that horrible smile plastered across its face. It tilted its head slightly, as if curious, and then it waved. Just a small, casual wave. Like it knew me. I sat frozen, too terrified to move, as it slowly pressed its hand against the window. The glass groaned under the pressure, small cracks spiderwebbing out from beneath its palm. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it stepped back. The smile never left its face as it melted into the darkness, vanishing into the night like it had never been there at all. I stayed in the trailer until sunrise, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline, too scared to even blink. When the workers arrived in the morning, I told them there'd been a trespasser, but they just laughed it off. This place? No one comes out here, one of them said. Too creepy. I quit the next day, left the keys on the desk, and never looked back. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear it. Top, top, top. And I know one day it'll come back. And next time, it won't just wave. I wasn't even supposed to go out that night. I'd promised myself I'd stay in, light some candles, maybe do a face mask. Anything to convince myself that I didn't need a chaotic night to feel alive. But around 9:30, my phone buzzed. Come out, just for a bit. I stared at the message for a long minute. It was from a friend who always knew how to pull me into trouble, the kind of person who promises one drink, but whose nights always end with bad decisions and blurry memories. I should have said no. I knew I wouldn't, though. The silence in my apartment was already starting to weigh on me, and the thought of another night alone felt heavier than any hangover could. By 10 p.m., I was dressed, something tight, and just daring enough to convince myself I had control over the night, and in an Uber on my way to meet them. The bar was crowded, loud, and full of people who looked like they had nowhere better to be. I squeezed through the crowd to find my friends, ordered a drink, and told myself I'd stay for an hour. Just long enough to pretend I was having fun, then slip out and go home. That's when I saw him. He was leaning against the wall by the jukebox, sipping a beer, looking relaxed in a way that felt intentional. Messy hair, scruffy beard, and a worn denim jacket. It was a whole look, and it worked. He wasn't surrounded by friends, wasn't vying for attention. He just existed in that easy way that makes you curious. I didn't plan to walk over to him, but somehow I found myself standing next to him anyway. What are we listening to? I asked, nodding toward the jukebox. He gave me a slow smile, the kind that feels like an invitation. Whatever doesn't make everyone hate me. I laughed a little too easily. Good strategy. We fell into conversation, the kind that flows effortlessly, as if we'd known each other for years. He had that kind of humor that sneaks up on you, subtle and sharp, and I found myself leaning in closer without even realizing it. Every time his hand brushed mine, it sent a jolt through me, just enough to keep me hooked. The night blurred. One drink became two, then three. And before I knew it, we were standing too close, his hand on my waist, his thumb tracing slow circles that made my heart race. Do you want to get out of here? He asked, voice low enough to feel like a secret. I didn't even hesitate. Yeah, let's go. We walked out into the cold night air, arms brushing as we moved in sync like we'd done this dance 100 times before. The city felt electric, every step charged with possibility. We grabbed a cab, and by the time we reached his place, we were already tangled together, kissing like we were trying to consume each other before the night could slip away. His apartment was small and a little chaotic but cozy. It smelled like clean laundry and something faintly herbal, maybe sage or eucalyptus. It suited him somehow. I barely had time to notice, though. We were already pulling at each other's clothes. Falling in a bed like gravity had decided it for us. The sex was good, better than good. It had that perfect blend of spontaneity and comfort, the kind that makes you feel like, just for a moment, the world is exactly as it should be. I let myself get lost in it, in him, in the rush of forgetting everything outside that room. For those few hours, it felt like freedom. But mornings always have a way of pulling you back down to earth. I woke up to the pale light of dawn filtering through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the room. His arm was draped over me, heavy and warm, his breathing steady against the back of my neck. For a second, I let myself enjoy the quiet comfort of it, the rare intimacy of waking up next to someone without any words yet spoken. But then it hit me, that familiar weight settling in my chest, the sharp edge of what the hell am I doing? Pressing in on me from all sides. I knew the script. I'd been here before, too many times to count. The night always felt magical, full of possibility. But the morning after? The morning after was always a reminder that some things only make sense in the dark. I slipped out from under his arm, careful not to wake him, and started gathering my clothes from the floor. Every piece felt heavier than it had the night before, as if they carried the weight of every impulsive decision I'd ever made. I pulled on my jeans and sweater, smoothing them out like it would somehow make me feel more put together than I actually was. He stirred as I reached for my shoes, his voice thick with sleep. "You heading out?" I gave him a small, tight smile. "Yeah, I've got an early morning." He nodded, propping himself up on one elbow, his hair a mess, but somehow still perfect. "Last night was fun," he said, and I could tell he meant it. "Yeah," I whispered. "It was..." And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb felt longer than it should have, the cold morning air biting at my skin. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, but it didn't help. The chill wasn't just in the air. It was inside me, that familiar ache that always shows up when the night ends and reality sets in. The Uber ride home was quiet, the driver making polite small talk that I half listened to. I stared out the window, watching the city wake up around me, and tried to convince myself that this was fine, that this was what I wanted. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't about him. It never is. It was about the pattern, the way I keep chasing these fleeting moments, hoping they'll fill the empty spaces inside me. And the way they never do. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my bed without even bothering to change. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and indifferent, as if it held all the answers I was too afraid to ask. I wish I could say that night was the last time, that I finally learned my lesson, stopped looking for connection in places it doesn't exist. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe someday I'll figure out how to stop, or maybe I'll keep going one night at a time, hoping that eventually one of these mornings will feel different. But for now, all I can do is keep moving forward. One kiss, one drink, one morning after the next. The first time I tried flirting at a trivia night, I almost broke up a friend group by accident. Honestly, I just wanted to show off that I knew the capital of Liechtenstein. Things spiraled from there. It all started because my buddy Chris dragged me to this bar for their weekly trivia night. "It's a great place to meet people," he said, conveniently leaving out the part where it's mostly competitive teams of trivia fanatics who take this stuff way too seriously. I wasn't exactly enthusiastic about the whole idea, but it was either this or another night of doom scrolling on my couch. So I went, fully expecting to sit quietly, answer exactly one question about Star Wars, and leave without incident. And then I saw her. She was at the bar with a group of people, laughing as they argued over whether or not the periodic table question had been worded unfairly. She was beautiful in that cool, effortless way. Messy bun, oversized denim jacket, a beer in one hand, and the kind of laugh that made you want to join whatever conversation she was having. I turned to Chris. "I think I like trivia now." Chris grinned. "Go talk to her. Ask to join their team or something." "That sounds like a terrible idea," I said, already planning exactly how I was going to do it. I waited for an opportunity, which came 5 minutes later when I overheard her friend loudly declare, "There is no way Luxembourg is a real country." That was my moment. I walked over, trying to look casual, but probably looking like I was trying way too hard. "Actually, Luxembourg is real," I said, sliding into their conversation. "It's small, but it's real." The group turned to look at me, and for a second, I was sure they were going to tell me to leave. But then she smiled. "Thank you. I told you guys it was real," she said, nudging the guy next to her. "This random stranger agrees with me, so I win." The guy, who I later found out was named Ben, rolled his eyes. "Okay, fine, Luxembourg is real. but I still don't think it's a real answer to the trivia question. Geography is geography, I said, shrugging. You can't argue with borders. That made her laugh, and it was such a good laugh that I knew I had to keep the conversation going. I'm Jake, I said, holding out my hand. Mind if I join your team? She hesitated for just a second, glancing at her friends. What do you guys think? Can we use some fresh brain power? Ben looked like he was about to say no, but another one of her friends chimed in. Sure, why not? The more, the merrier. And just like that, I was part of Team Wizard of Oz. They introduced themselves. Her name was Emily, by the way, and I did my best to pull my weight during the game. I got a few questions right here and there, mostly random facts about pop culture and obscure geography. Honestly, I was mostly just trying not to embarrass myself. Everything was going great. The drinks were flowing, the conversation was easy, and I was riding high on the thrill of impressing Emily with my deeply useless knowledge of European microstates. And then came the disaster question. All right, the trivia host said, leaning into the mic for double points, which 1994 film features the quote, "That's some high-quality H2O?" I grinned. Easy. It's the water boy. Before anyone else could answer, I said it out loud. Loud enough for the whole table, and unfortunately, the other teams, to hear. Ben immediately shot me a look that could have melted steel. Dude, we were going to steal that answer. Oh, I said, realizing my mistake a second too late. Sorry, I thought. I mean, it was obvious, right? Ben looked like I had just insulted his entire family lineage. It's not about being obvious, he hissed. It's about strategy. Emily rolled her eyes. Ben, relax. It's just a game. It's not just a game, Ben muttered, crossing his arms. It's about winning. I could feel the tension in the air, and suddenly, my fun little flirting experiment felt a lot more like walking through a minefield. I glanced at Emily, hoping she wasn't about to kick me off the team for ruining their night. But instead, she leaned in, grinning. Don't worry, she whispered. Ben takes trivia way too seriously. You're doing great. That little moment, just her leaning in and smiling like we were sharing a secret, gave me the boost I needed to keep going. We ended up answering the rest of the questions together, laughing every time Ben got irrationally mad about something trivial. By the end of the night, we didn't win. Not even close, thanks to me blurting out the Waterboy answer. But I didn't care, because when the game wrapped up and people started collecting their things, Emily turned to me and said, "So, do you want to grab a drink somewhere else?" Without all the trivia drama. I blinked, trying to play it cool, but probably looking like I just won the lottery. Yeah, I said, grinning. I'd like that. Ben scowled as we left the bar together. But honestly, totally worth it. It wasn't planned, not that night or any other. But with Mia, things always had a way of happening before I could think them through. We were best friends for years, practically inseparable. The kind of friendship that feels more like family, where everything is second nature. We knew each other's quirks, each other's favorite songs, each other's heartbreaks. And for a long time, that was enough. Until it wasn't. It was late. One of those humid summer nights when the heat makes everything feel heavy. She'd just gone through a rough breakup, and I'd been keeping her company the way I always did. We'd been out for drinks, the kind of night where you say, just one, and then somehow the bartender knows your name by the end of it. By the time we got back to my place, we were both tipsy and laughing, but it wasn't the happy kind of laughter. It was the kind that's covering up something else. You know what sucks? Mia said, kicking off her shoes and collapsing onto my couch. Everyone always leaves. Not everyone, I said, sitting down next to her. She gave me this tired smile, the one she always gave me when life wore her down, but she didn't want me to worry. Yeah, but everyone who matters. That's not true, I told her, and I meant it. She looked at me then, really looked at me, her eyes softer than they usually were. You never leave, she whispered. And just like that, the space between us shifted, heavy and charged like we'd stumbled into something neither of us was ready for. I could have cracked a joke, defused the moment, but I didn't. I just sat there, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. Mia, I started, but before I could say anything else, she kissed me. It wasn't slow. It wasn't tentative. It was the kind of kiss that felt inevitable, like every late-night conversation, every shared secret, every moment we'd ever had was leading to this. And the second her lips touched mine, everything I'd been pretending not to feel came crashing down around me. I kissed her back because, honestly, I didn't know how not to. She was Mia, messy, complicated, brilliant Mia, and I was already too far gone to stop myself. We ended up in my bed, limbs tangled, hearts racing, and for a little while it felt perfect, like we'd found something we didn't even know we were missing. Afterward, we lay there in the dark, my hand tracing lazy patterns on her back, her head resting on my chest. I could feel her breath against my skin, slow and steady, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. "This doesn't have to change anything, right?" she whispered, her voice small. I knew what she meant. I knew she was scared of losing me, scared of what this meant, scared of breaking something that had always been good. And I could have told her the truth. I could have said that it changed everything, that I'd been in love with her for years and didn't know how to stop. But I didn't. "Yeah," I whispered back. "It doesn't have to change anything." But it did. The next morning was quiet. We tried to act normal. Coffee, small talk, the usual banter, but there was an edge to everything, like we were both trying too hard. When she left, she kissed me on the cheek and said, "See you later," and I smiled like I believed her. For the next few weeks, we slipped into this strange limbo. Friends most of the time, lovers when the moment felt right. It was easy to pretend that nothing had changed when we were tangled up in each other. But the second she left my bed, reality came crashing in. I knew I was falling for her again, harder this time, but I didn't know how to tell her. Every time I thought about saying the words out loud, the fear crept in. What if she didn't feel the same? What if saying it ruined everything? So I kept quiet, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd figure it out on her own. She didn't. One night, out of nowhere, she told me she was going on a date. "It's not serious," she said, like that would make it easier. "Just a guy from work." I smiled, even though it felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. "That's great." I lied. She gave me this look, soft and apologetic, like she knew exactly what she was doing but didn't know how to stop. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how much I loved her, I wasn't the person she wanted. Not really. We kept sleeping together after that, but it felt different. Every kiss tasted like goodbye. Every touch a reminder that I was holding on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. And the worst part? I let it happen because I didn't know how to let her go. The end came slowly, the way it always does with people who mean too much. One day, she stopped texting as often. The late-night calls became less frequent. And before I knew it, we were strangers occupying the same memories, trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. The last time I saw her, we hugged goodbye, and it felt like the final page of a book I wasn't ready to finish. I wanted to tell her everything, that I loved her, that I always had, that losing her felt like losing a part of myself. But I didn't. I just smiled and said, "Take care, Mia," like it was nothing. And then she was gone. It's been months now, and I still think about her. I still catch myself scrolling through old photos, replaying our conversations in my head, wondering if things could have been different. I miss her laugh, her sarcasm, the way everything felt lighter when she was around. But most of all, I miss the version of me that existed when I was with her. The one who believed that maybe, just maybe, love didn't have to hurt. People say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best decision you'll ever make or the worst mistake of your life. For me, it was both. For a little while I had her, and even though it ended, even though it left me with more questions than answers, I wouldn't take it back. Because some people come into your life to stay, and some only pass through. And maybe, if you're lucky, you get to love them, even if it's only for a little while. And maybe that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have. I always thought our relationship was solid. We weren't perfect, but we had a rhythm. You know, that kind of comfort where you don't need to finish sentences because the other person already knows what you mean? That was us. Or so I thought. But looking back, I realize now that everything started to unravel so subtly that I didn't even notice the pieces coming loose until it was too late. It began with little things, forgotten goodnight kisses, fewer texts throughout the day. At first, I told myself it was just the ebb and flow of being together for a few years. I mean, every couple hits a lull at some point, right? But then came the phone, always face down on the table, always on silent. That wasn't like him. He used to be the type who couldn't leave his phone alone for 2 seconds without checking some meme or sports update. And suddenly, he was treating it like a state secret. One night, I was curled up on the couch, scrolling through Netflix while he claimed to be working late. But around midnight, his work sent me a text. I stared at the screen, heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't anything incriminating, just I had a great time tonight. Sleep well, Red Heart. The message wasn't even meant for me. It was from one of his female colleagues. And the worst part? He hadn't just texted her. He'd forgotten to log out of his email, and I saw a string of messages. Little flirty exchanges, subtle but telling. My stomach dropped. Still, I held on in denial. I confronted him about the texts, my voice trembling, half hoping there was some reasonable explanation. He played it cool, almost too cool. She's just a friend, he said, brushing it off like it was nothing. You know how people are at work? Friendly, flirty even. It doesn't mean anything. I wanted so badly to believe him. I wanted to believe that what we had wasn't being slowly unraveled by something or someone else. But the signs kept piling up. He'd started going to the gym, which wasn't weird in itself, but the way he talked about it was just trying to get back in shape, he said, even though he was already fit. Then there were the clothes. He went from wearing the same ratty jeans and band tees to designer button-ups and cologne. When I mentioned it, he smiled and said he just wanted to mix things up. The man who used to leave dishes in the sink for days was now spritzing on cologne to grab groceries. I remember the moment I realized I'd been fooling myself the entire time. We were sitting across from each other at dinner, and I was telling him about my day, some funny story about my coworker spilling coffee all over herself. He smiled at all the right moments, laughed when he was supposed to, but his eyes? They weren't there. They were glazed over, looking through me, like I was just another piece of background noise in his life. It hit me like a punch in the gut. He wasn't just distracted. He was already gone. I started paying more attention after that, piecing together the puzzle bit by bit. There were late-night phone calls he'd take outside, hushed conversations that ended abruptly whenever I walked into the room. I even caught him deleting messages, something he'd never done before. And then there was the trip. He told me it was a work retreat, a weekend at some lakeside resort with his team. I wanted to believe him. God, I needed to believe him. But deep down, I knew. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I tracked his location. Not because I wanted to catch him, okay, maybe a little bit, but mostly because I needed to prove to myself that I was just being paranoid, that the man I loved wasn't the kind of person who'd lie to my face. But when his little blue that popped up on the map, it wasn't anywhere near a resort. It was at a hotel a few towns over, and he wasn't alone. I could see the reservation on our shared credit card statement. 2 guests, 1 room. When he got home, I tried to play it cool. I told myself I needed more proof, something concrete. But every time I looked at him, I could feel the weight of the lies between us, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. So one night, after a couple of glasses of wine, I just asked him, "Are you cheating on me?" At first, he laughed, an awkward, nervous laugh. "What? No, babe. Why would you even think that?" But I saw the way his hands trembled, the way his eyes darted away from mine. I knew. And in that moment, I think he knew that I knew. What came next was a blur, a lot of shouting, accusations thrown like knives. He tried to gaslight me, saying I was imagining things, that I was being insecure. But I wasn't the one sneaking around. I wasn't the one booking hotel rooms in the middle of nowhere. And when I finally showed him the receipts, the texts, the hotel booking, the location history, he just sat there silent. There was this one time when I applied for what seemed like a dream job. Cool office vibe, unlimited PTO, and all that corporate fluff. 3 interviews deep, I was sure they were going to offer me the position. The HR manager even dropped hints like, "We're excited to have you on board soon." Then nothing. Radio silence. I waited a week, checked my email like it owed me money, and still, not a peep. At some point, I started wondering if I got ghosted by a corporation, just sitting there with the same sense of abandonment people describe after bad Tinder dates. Honestly, it made me miss getting rejected the old-fashioned way. Just say no, folks. I promise we'll survive. But here's the kicker. Months later, I'm scrolling through LinkedIn and see the same position, freshly posted again. Like, "We're hiring. Come join our amazing team." I felt like a fool who'd been stood up at the altar, only to find out the ex is now engaged to someone else. You know it should be illegal? This nonsense. Make it punishable by law. You can't run a multi-step interview process like it's an Olympic triathlon. Get our hopes up, and then ghost us like an insecure first date. I want compensation for the emotional labor, therapy copays at the very least. What's wild is how normal these fake job postings have become. A friend told me some companies just use them to test the market or as leverage to pressure existing employees. Imagine posting fake obituaries just to see who'll cry for you. Like, sorry, grandma isn't actually dead. We just wanted to check if y'all still cared. That's corporate HR for you. Emotional manipulation with a smile. If I had my way, they'd throw job scammers into the same dungeon where they keep ticket scalpers. You ever try getting tickets to a decent concert? Forget it. These clowns swoop in, buy out the seats, and resell them at quadruple the price. Sports fans figured this scam out years ago, but apparently music festivals are still a scalper's buffet. The last time I tried going to Coachella, I had to sell a kidney just to afford general admission. And don't get me started on VIP passes. Might as well take out a mortgage. It's hilarious how quickly scalpers can turn an event for everyone into an elitist social club where the bouncers make you feel poor just for existing. Speaking of which, another thing that deserves a hard ban is insider trading. Not for us regular folks. No, we get in trouble for buying meme stocks too late, but for politicians. These people get to vote on laws that change the stock market and then mysteriously sell all their shares 2 days before the fallout. Yeah, real subtle. It's like betting on a horse race when you've already bribed the jockey. Meanwhile, I buy 1 share of some sketchy crypto on a friend's hot tip, and suddenly my bank's treating me like a criminal mastermind. Imagine if every politician's financial moves were made public, live-streamed like a Twitch marathon. Nancy Pelosi just bought Apple options. Press F to pay respects. Maybe then they'd behave. Or at least make it entertaining for the rest of us while they rob the system blind. But let's be real, the worst offenders aren't just politicians. It's the data brokers lurking in the shadows. They know everything: where you shop, what you eat, how often you Google your ex. And companies sell this info like it's candy at a school fundraiser. The other day, I mentioned getting new tires, and within 5 minutes, every ad on my phone was for tire sales. No thanks, FBI agent number 43, I got it covered. Here's a wild idea. Let's ban the sale of personal data outright. If companies want my info, they can pay me directly in cold hard cash. I'll gladly monetize my paranoia if it means I stop getting bombarded with ads for products I'll never buy. Honestly, if we have to live in a dystopia, at least let me earn enough to buy snacks for the apocalypse. And while we're on the topic of ads, can we talk about gambling commercials? They're everywhere, on TV, YouTube, even social media. It's like these companies want us to believe we're one lucky spin away from financial freedom. Newsflash: if casinos actually made people rich, they wouldn't look like palaces with marble floors. Yet here they are, shoving just one more bet down everyone's throat like it's some charitable cause. I'm not saying ban gambling itself, but can we at least stop pretending it's the same as supporting your local soup kitchen? It's funny how we've cracked down on cigarette ads, but not gambling ones. They say smoking kills you slowly. Yeah, so does gambling. Only it takes your house and car with it on the way out. Imagine the irony of seeing a commercial for debt consolidation right after a betting ad. Lost it all? Call now. No credit, no problem. Another thing that really grinds my gears: overly bright headlights. You know the ones. Those retina-searing LEDs that turn night drives into boss battles from a video game. There's no need to blind everyone just because you wanted to upgrade your headlights. It's driving, not a laser show. 1 second you're cruising along, minding your own business, and the next, you're questioning your entire life after being hit with what feels like a flashbang from Call of Duty. These lights should come with a warning. May cause sudden philosophical crises. Sometimes, I wonder if drivers with those lights are trying to send messages in Morse code. Maybe it's a cry for help. SOS, my truck is compensating for my insecurities. Whatever the case, it should be illegal to turn a 2-lane road into an ocular assault course. And don't even get me started on squatters. Imagine coming back from a vacation only to find some random people living in your house, with the audacity to say it's legally theirs. You call the cops, expecting justice, and they shrug like, "Sorry, bro, we can't do anything." They got a piece of paper. A piece of paper. Meanwhile, I have bills, mail, and 10 years' worth of embarrassing Amazon purchases addressed to that same house. But sure, let's believe the squatters. Squatting laws feel like a bad joke told at the worst possible time. We need a law that says if you can prove you've been paying for Wi-Fi in a place, it's legally yours. I don't care if the squatters have a signed lease from Zeus himself. Show me the Netflix account tied to that address. That's the only proof of residence I trust these days. Honestly, the world's full of things that need banning. Bad laws, corrupt politicians, shady businesses. But if I had to pick just one thing to outlaw, it'd be the quiet acceptance of nonsense. Because the more we let slide, the more life starts to feel like a poorly managed group project where the worst people somehow get the best grades. And if that's the case, maybe it's time we started rewriting the rules ourselves. This happened 3 years ago, and I still can't explain it. I had just moved into a new apartment, a cheap one-bedroom in a rundown building on the edge of town. The kind of place where the rent's low because the walls are thin and the pipes rattle all night. But I didn't care. I just needed a fresh start after a bad breakup and losing my job. The apartment itself was fine. Bare walls, creaky floors, nothing special. The weird part was the door. Not the front door, the closet door in the bedroom. It was one of those old wooden ones with slats and a rusty knob that stuck if you didn't jiggle it just right. From the moment I moved in, it gave me this uneasy feeling like it didn't belong. Every time I passed by it, I had the irrational urge to make sure it was closed. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just a closet, right? The first few nights were uneventful. I'd lie in bed, scrolling through my phone until I dozed off, the city sounds outside lulling me to sleep. But on the third night, I woke up around 3 a.m. The room was dead quiet, too quiet, and I could feel something was off. That's when I noticed it. The closet door was open. Not all the way, just a few inches. Enough for a sliver of darkness to leak into the room. I was sure I'd closed it before I went to bed. I always closed it. My chest tightened, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. I told myself it was just the building settling. Maybe the door hadn't latched properly. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and walked over to the closet. The air around it felt cooler. Too cool for a summer night. I grabbed the knob, forced the door shut, and twisted it until I heard the faint click of the latch. Then I crawled back into bed, pulling the blanket up to my chin like a scared kid. The next night, I made sure the door was shut tight before going to bed. I jiggled the knob, even gave it a little tug to make sure it wouldn't pop open. But at 3:13 a.m. on the dot, I woke up again, and the door was open. Same thing, just a crack like someone had pulled it open from the inside. I stared at it, my heart racing, my breath shallow. Every instinct told me not to get out of bed, not to go near it, but I couldn't just leave it open either. I forced myself to move, legs trembling as I stood up and walked toward the closet. As I reached for the door, I swear I heard it, a soft whisper. I yanked the door shut so fast, I almost wrenched the knob off. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stood there, staring at the closed door, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. Maybe the air vents had pushed it open. Maybe it was just an old building being weird. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right with that door. The next day, I went to the landlord's office and asked if anyone had mentioned weird things happening in the apartment. The guy at the desk gave me this look like he'd heard it all before. "You're in 3C, right?" he asked. I nodded. He sighed and leaned in a little closer. "Look, if you're hearing noises or stuff's moving around, just ignore it." The last few tenants, they said the same thing. Doors opening on their own, hearing whispers. But nothing ever came of it. Just the usual weird old building stuff. I left the office feeling worse than before. If other tenants had experienced the same thing, it wasn't just in my head. Something was going on. That night, I locked the closet door. It didn't have a proper lock, but I slid an old chair in front of it and wedged the back under the knob just to be safe. Then I tried to sleep, telling myself it was all just a series of coincidences. At exactly 3:13 a.m., I woke up to the sound of wood scraping against the floor. The chair. I bolted upright, and my stomach dropped. The chair had been shoved aside. It lay on its side, a few feet from the closet door, which was open. All the way this time, the air in the room was freezing, and I could smell something faint but unmistakable, like damp earth and rotting wood. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, shining the flashlight toward the closet. And then I saw it, a hand, not reaching out, just resting on the floor, half hidden in the shadows inside the closet. The skin was pale, almost gray, with long, thin fingers curled slightly against the wood. It wasn't moving, just there. I couldn't breathe. My body refused to move. I sat frozen, staring at the hand, waiting for it to do something. Anything. But it didn't. Then the fingers twitched. I don't remember how I got out of the room. 1 second, I was staring at the closet, and the next, I was running down the hall, barefoot and gasping for air. I ran out of the building, straight to my car, and didn't stop driving until I reached a friend's place across town. I sat in her driveway for half an hour, shaking uncontrollably. The next day, I went back to the apartment to grab my things. I told the landlord I wasn't coming back, didn't care about the lease or the deposit. I just wanted to be done with it. When I went inside to pack, the closet door was closed. The chair was back in place like I'd never moved it. But on the floor, just inside the door, was a handprint. Not a smudge, not dust, a perfect human-shaped handprint, pressed into the wood like the hand had melted into it. I moved out that same day. I still have nightmares sometimes. In them, I'm standing in front of that closet door, and it's open. There's nothing inside, just darkness. And every time, I hear that whisper again, soft and patient. Come closer. I don't know what was in that closet, and I never want to find out. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear it just outside my bedroom door, waiting, and every now and then, I check the knob just to make sure it's still locked. We call this one the Great Fire Alarm Caper, and honestly, I can't believe it happened. The entire thing started as a stupid joke, just some harmless goofing off during study hall, and ended with the entire school standing in the parking lot while the fire department tore the building apart. It started with Kevin. Now, Kevin wasn't the brightest bulb in the box, but he was very good at finding new ways to make things worse. If there was ever a line that shouldn't be crossed, Kevin would sprint across it, flip you off, and then set the line on fire just to make sure. That day in study hall, we were sitting around bored out of our minds. The teacher wasn't paying attention. He was scrolling through Zillow listings on his laptop. So Kevin decided to test out a new hack he had seen on YouTube. You guys know you can set off the fire alarm with a vape, right? Kevin whispered, holding up his prized possession, a bright blue vape pen with a flavor called Alien Apple. If you blow the smoke into the detector, it thinks it's a fire. We all looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Dude, no, I said, shaking my head. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Kevin grinned. Exactly. Before any of us could stop him. Kevin stood up, walked to the corner of the room, and aimed his vape directly at the nearest fire alarm sensor. Watch this, he said like some kind of idiot magician, and took the biggest vape hit I've ever seen in my life. What happened next was both immediate and spectacular. The fire alarm didn't just go off. It exploded. The loudest, most obnoxious siren on earth started blaring through the building, and the flashing strobe lights lit up the room like a rave. Everyone screamed, jumped out of their seats, and started running in every direction like headless chickens. Kevin stood there, frozen in place, blinking through the vape cloud like he couldn't believe it had actually worked. "Oh my God," I whispered. "You moron." Within seconds, the whole school was in chaos. The alarm was deafening. Teachers burst into the hallway, looking around wildly, trying to figure out what was on fire. Students grabbed their backpacks and started sprinting toward the exits like we were evacuating a sinking cruise ship. I saw one kid jump over 3 desks in a row, parkour style, just to get out the door faster. We figured, okay, the alarm would go off for a minute or two, and then the teachers would figure out it was a false alarm. We'd get a stern lecture about school safety, and life would move on. We were wrong. So very, very wrong. You see, nobody accounted for Protocol Alpha. Apparently, our school had recently upgraded its emergency system, and now, anytime the fire alarm went off, the whole building went into full lockdown. The sprinklers activated in the science lab. The hallway doors slammed shut, And worst of all, the system automatically called the fire department. Within 10 minutes, 2 giant red fire trucks came barreling into the parking lot, sirens blaring. Firefighters in full gear stormed into the building like they were gearing up to take down a 5-alarm blaze. Meanwhile, all 800 students were standing outside on the football field, shivering in their hoodies, completely confused as to why the school was treating this like a national emergency. And then it started to rain? Of course it did, because nothing says high school disaster like 800 kids standing in the freezing rain, waiting for the fire department to tell them whether or not we were about to die. Everyone was soaked. Half the students were using their backpacks as umbrellas. The cheerleaders were huddled under the bleachers, shivering like wet puppies. And in the middle of it all was Kevin, just standing there, grinning like an idiot, with alien apple vape smoke still clinging to his clothes. Dude, I whispered, we are so screwed. At this point, the teachers were pacing up and down the field, trying to keep order while the firefighters swept the building. You could hear Mr. Harper, the vice principal, screaming into his phone from across the parking lot. No, there isn't a fire. I don't know why the alarm went off. Just turn it off. But the system wouldn't let them shut off the alarm until the fire department gave the all clear, which meant we were stuck in the rain for a very long time. Meanwhile, rumors were spreading like wildfire. Some kids were saying the chemistry lab exploded. Others swore it was a cafeteria grease fire. A group of freshmen claimed that a squirrel had set off the alarm by chewing through a wire. And then, just as the firefighters were wrapping up their sweep, Kevin turned to me with the stupidest grin I've ever seen. Hey, he said, what if I told them it was a science experiment? Isa, do not talk to the firefighters. But it was too late. Kevin marched right up to the fire chief, this huge guy with a handlebar mustache, and said, hey, so this might have been my fault? But in my defense, it was for science. The fire chief just stared at him for a moment, completely deadpan, before turning to one of his crew members and muttering, we came here for this? I thought for sure Kevin was going to get expelled, or at the very least arrested. But somehow, the fire chief just shook his head and walked away muttering, high schoolers, under his breath like he'd seen this kind of thing 1,000 times before. We spent another hour outside while the firefighters reset the alarm system. By the time we were finally allowed back inside, the school was soaked, our shoes were squelching, and Mr. Harper looked like he was about 10 seconds away from quitting his job forever. But Kevin walked back into the building like a conquering hero. Students were high-fiving him in the hallways, cheering his name like he was some kind of folk legend. And the best part? Nobody ever figured out it was the vape that set off the alarm. To this day, the official school report says it was a sensor malfunction. And every time someone brings up the Great Fire Alarm Caper, Kevin just shrugs, takes a sip of his Gatorade, and says, science, man. Can't argue with science. And honestly, I can't. You ever have one of those moments where everything slows down and you can practically hear the universe whisper, you messed up? Yeah, that was me standing barefoot at the edge of a lake, holding a jellyfish the size of my palm. In hindsight, it's easy to say how stupid it was. At the time, I just thought, free jellyfish. It was one of those weird, impulsive moments. My friends and I had rented this crappy lakeside cabin for the weekend, hoping for some chill time away from the city. We were all a little buzzed, nothing wild, just enough to feel invincible. The sun was setting, the water looked like melted gold, and I noticed this translucent little blob washed up near my feet. It didn't seem like a big deal. Hell, it looked kind of beautiful, glistening with these iridescent blue streaks, almost like glass. I figured, what's the harm? It wasn't one of those gigantic jellyfish you hear about. It fit neatly in my hand, no stingers visible. I felt it pulse gently like a weird little water balloon with a heartbeat, and I thought it might be dead or something. So, naturally, my genius brain decided to scoop it up and show it off to the others. Hey, check it out, I called out, waving the thing like I just caught a fish with my bare hands. One of my friends, Sam, took a sip of his beer and squinted at me. Yo, I think that's a bad idea, man. Nah, it's fine, I said. I could hear my own confidence, oozing out like grease on a diner grill. I don't think it's even alive. Then it happened. A jolt shot through my hand, sharp and sudden, like someone jammed a live wire into my skin. My muscles seized, and for a second, I couldn't tell if I'd been stung or electrocuted. The jellyfish, or whatever it was, suddenly felt like molten lead in my hand, and my fingers locked up so hard I couldn't even drop the damn thing. Shit! I gasped, stumbling back. The burning sensation exploded from my hand, radiating up my arm and into my chest like wildfire. Every nerve in my body seemed to light up at once, and I dropped to my knees in the shallow water, gasping for air. My friends freaked out. Sam bolted toward me, cursing under his breath, while another friend, Emily, started frantically Googling what to do when your idiot friend touches a jellyfish. The worst part? I couldn't even scream. My throat felt paralyzed, as if the venom had crept up my neck and hijacked my voice box. Dude, what the hell is wrong with you? Sam grabbed my wrist and tried to pry my fingers apart to release the jellyfish, but my hand was stuck in this awful claw shape. It was like my body had forgotten how to let go. I could hear Emily in the background shouting, "It's a box jellyfish. We need vinegar or something now?" Sam looked at her like she'd grown a second head. Vinegar? Who the hell brings vinegar to a lake trip? Emily, that thing can kill you, she yelled, her voice cracking with panic. He's gonna go into cardiac arrest if we don't. That's when I blacked out. I wish I could say that my life flashed before my eyes, but it didn't. No warm memories, no slow-motion montage of childhood highlights. Just this cold, suffocating darkness, like the world had hit a reset button and left me floating in the void. When I came to, I was lying on the shore, soaked and shivering, with Sam slapping my face like he was trying to wake a corpse. Emily hovered nearby, holding a bottle of water and looking like she was about to burst into tears. "Holy shit, you're alive," Sam whispered, as if he didn't quite believe it. My chest burned with every breath, and my hand throbbed like I'd slammed it in a car door. I could still feel the ghost of the sting, a dull, electric ache radiating through my arm. I groaned, trying to sit up, but Sam pushed me back down. "Don't move, dude," he said. "We thought you were dead for a second." Apparently, Emily had found some random first aid instructions online and dumped every bottle of fresh water we had over my hand. Not that it did much good. The sting had already done its damage, paralyzing half my arm and sending my heart into some kind of chaotic tango for a solid 30 seconds. The real kicker? We weren't even at a real lake. It was one of those brackish lagoons connected to the ocean, which meant that box jellyfish, normally found in tropical waters, could occasionally drift inland. Just my luck. Of all the dumb things I've done, almost getting killed by a jellyfish on a weekend getaway now holds the top spot. The ride to the emergency room was awkward as hell. I sat there clutching my arm, half numb and still in shock, while Sam kept nervously glancing at me from the driver's seat. Emily kept whispering apologies under her breath, as if my near-death experience was somehow her fault. At the hospital, the doctor gave me the kind of look you reserve for people who win Darwin Awards. "You're lucky you didn't go into full cardiac arrest," he said, wrapping my hand in gauze. "A box jellyfish sting can kill you in under 5 minutes." I wanted to say something snarky like, "Well, thanks for the heads up, doc," but all I managed was a weak nod. I was too tired to even feel embarrassed. They kept me overnight for observation, and by morning, most of the paralysis had worn off. My hand still felt like it had been put through a meat grinder, but at least I could move my fingers again. When we finally got back to the cabin, everyone was weirdly quiet. We sat around the campfire that night, sipping beers and avoiding eye contact, like we'd all seen something we weren't supposed to. Nobody said it out loud, but we all knew the truth. I was lucky to be alive. A second slower, a little less luck, and I wouldn't be sitting there at all. I still think about that stupid jellyfish every now and then. Not in a life-affirming epiphany kind of way, more like a constant, nagging reminder that death is always closer than we think. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight, wrapped in a pretty little package that looks harmless enough to pick up. And sometimes, if you're really unlucky, you get just enough time to realize how stupid you were before it all goes black. It always starts the same way. One drink to unwind, a second because why not, and by the third, you're halfway to a bad decision that feels inevitable. I wasn't planning on going out. I never really plan these things. But a friend called me around 8, saying she was at a rooftop bar and the night was just starting. I told myself I'd join her for one drink and head home early, but deep down, I knew better. Nights like these always stretch further than you think, pulling you into places you didn't expect to go. I showed up just as the sky turned from dusk to night, the city buzzing beneath us. The rooftop was packed, with people leaning into each other, laughing too loudly, and making the kind of temporary promises only alcohol can inspire. The breeze was cool, the lights were dim, and the air smelled like cigarettes, perfume, and the vague promise of something exciting. And that's when I saw him. He was leaning against the far side of the bar, holding a beer, looking out over the city like he wasn't in any particular rush to be anywhere else. Something about the way he stood so still, so easy, caught my attention. He didn't seem desperate to be noticed, but somehow, I noticed him anyway. He caught me looking. His lips curled into a small, knowing grin. The kind of grin that makes you feel like you've already made a choice without realizing it. I didn't look away. I should have, but I didn't. He took that as an invitation. Maybe it was. And within a minute, he was standing next to me. Close, but not too close. "You looked bored," he said, and there was a flicker of amusement in his voice. I said, matching his grin. "But you've got about 5 minutes to fix that." He chuckled. Challenge accepted. And just like that, we were off. We talked for a while about nothing, really. The kind of light, easy conversation that doesn't mean much but feels good anyway. His voice was low and smooth, like every word was deliberate. He leaned in just close enough to make it feel intimate without overstepping, like he knew exactly how to keep me hooked without making it obvious. The drinks flowed. Time slipped by in that blurry way it always does on nights like these. One moment, we were talking at the bar, and the next, we were standing shoulder to shoulder near the railing, watching the lights of the city flicker below us. And then he said it, the line that always comes sooner or later. "Want to get out of here?" It wasn't really a question. It was an inevitability. I nodded, smiling because I knew exactly where this night was heading, and I didn't care. Not in that moment. We left the bar together, walking side by side through the quiet streets, his hand brushing against mine. It felt easy, natural, like this was just what people do. Meet someone, drink too much, and fall into each other for a night that's designed to disappear by morning. His apartment was small but clean, with half-filled bookshelves and a couch that looked like it was barely used. We didn't waste time. The door clicked shut, and the world outside ceased to exist. The sex was good. Not the kind you write songs about, but good enough to make you forget everything else for a little while. We moved together like two people trying to press pause on the world, to freeze the night in place and live inside it for as long as we could. For a few hours, it worked. The outside world didn't matter. There was only us, breathless, tangled in sheets, laughing softly at nothing. But mornings always come, no matter how much you wish they wouldn't. I woke up to the sound of the city stirring outside the window. The room was too bright, the air too still. He was still asleep beside me, his arms slung lazily over my hip, his breathing deep and even. For a second, I let myself enjoy the warmth of it, the strange comfort of being next to someone, even if they were a stranger. But the weight in my chest told me the truth. This was just another night that felt like something in the moment, but wasn't. It never is. I knew how this would go. I'd slip out quietly, gather my things, and leave before he woke up. I'd tell myself it was fine, that this was all I wanted, just a night, just a distraction, just something to fill the empty spaces. But it's never really just that, is it? I slid out of bed, careful not to wake him, and started pulling on my clothes. My jeans felt stiff, my top wrinkled, and every piece felt heavier in the morning light, like they carried more than just fabric. They carried all the weight of every night like this I'd ever had. I was almost to the door when I heard him stir. "Leaving already?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I turned, giving him a small, practiced smile. "Yeah, I've got stuff to do." He nodded, propping himself up on one elbow, his hair a mess but somehow perfect. "It was fun, though." "Yeah," I whispered. "It was..." And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb was cold and quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. I wrapped my coat around me, but it didn't help. The chill I felt wasn't just from the morning air. It was deeper than that, the familiar ache that always shows up after nights like these. The Uber ride home was silent. the driver humming along to the radio while I stared out the window, watching the city blur by. I told myself it was fine, that this was what I wanted. No strings, no complications. Just a night, and nothing more. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to ignore. It wasn't about him. It never is. It was about the pattern, the way I keep searching for something in these fleeting moments, hoping they'll fill the gaps, only to find that they never do. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my bed without even bothering to change. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and unhelpful, as if waiting for me to figure out what the hell I was doing with my life. I lay there, waiting for the heaviness to lift. But it didn't. It never does. I wish I could say this was the last time, that I finally figured it out, stopped chasing moments that never feel as good as I want them to. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe someday, I'll stop. Maybe I'll learn how to sit with myself without needing someone else to fill the space. Or maybe I'll keep going one night at a time, hoping that eventually one of them will stick. But until then, all I can do is keep moving. One drink, one kiss, one morning after the next. It was just after midnight when I found the old notebook at the bottom of a storage box I hadn't opened in years. I'd been meaning to clear out my closet for months, but I kept putting it off. Too much effort. Too many memories waiting to ambush me. But that night, restless and out of excuses, I finally tackled it. The notebook was beat up, its once bright cover now dull and frayed around the edges. I recognized it immediately, the one Mia and I had shared back when we thought writing notes to each other was cooler than texting. We called it our book of brilliant ideas, even though most of it was doodles and ridiculous plans we never followed through on. I sat cross-legged on the floor, turning the brittle pages carefully, as if rushing might ruin what was left of it. Inside were grocery lists we never shopped for, concert tickets we never bought, and sketches of future road trips we never took. Halfway through, I found a list titled Things We Gotta Do Someday. Her handwriting, messy and tilted at an angle, followed by my blocky all-caps notes in the margins. 1. See the Northern Lights. No clue where we're supposed to do this, but yes. 2. Learn how to surf. You're gonna break your nose. 3. Stay up for 48 hours straight just to see what happens. We will definitely cry at some point. 4. Get matching tattoos. You're not picking the design. I smiled, my chest aching in that familiar way, the way it always did when I thought about her. We had big dreams back then, the kind that feel too far away to ever run out. But eventually, life caught up. Promises faded. We drifted apart, the way people do when they think they'll always have more time. I stared at the last item on the list, running my thumb over the ink like I could press it deeper into the page. 5. Meet up in 10 years and see how we did. We got this. The date written next to it was tonight. I sat there for a long time, the weight of the years between then and now settling over me like a heavy coat. I hadn't thought about Mia in a while, not in any serious way, at least. We'd stopped talking sometime after college, not because anything went wrong, but because life had a way of pulling us in opposite directions without either of us noticing. I wondered if she remembered the list, if she'd laugh at how naive we were, or if it would hurt the way it hurt me now. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my phone and typed her name into the search bar. Mia. Her contact was still saved. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, thumb hovering over the call button, the cursor blinking like it was daring me. Finally, I pressed call. It rang twice before she picked up. Hello. Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she wasn't sure who'd be calling this late. Hey, Mia. There was a pause, long enough for me to wonder if I'd made a huge mistake. No way, she whispered. You actually remembered. I smiled, relief flooding through me. Of course I did. Did you? Honestly, she laughed, and the sound was like stepping into a familiar room. I thought about it earlier tonight, but I figured maybe you forgot. Never. I said it without hesitation, and for once, it felt like the truth. Want to meet up? I asked before the moment slipped away. Mia didn't even pause to think. Yeah, where? I suggested the old diner we used to hang out at. One of those places that never closes with sticky vinyl booze and a jukebox that never worked. She agreed instantly. "I'll see you in 15," she said, and just like that, we were picking up a thread we hadn't touched in years. When I walked into the diner, she was already there, sitting in the same corner booth we used to claim as our own. She looked up when the door jingled, and the smile that spread across her face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Hey you," she said, scooting over to make room. "Hey Mia," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. She looked almost exactly the same. Same wild hair, same sharp laugh, waiting just beneath the surface. But there was something different too, a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Like she'd finally stopped running from something. The waitress brought us 2 coffees without asking. Mia grinned. "I can't believe this place is still standing." "Barely," I said, looking around at the chipped tiles and faded menus. "But it's hanging in there." We talked for a while, slipping easily into the rhythm we'd once had, as if no time had passed at all. I told her about my job, the places I'd visited, the messes I'd made along the way. She told me about her art, how she'd moved cities twice, and how she'd fallen in and out of love more times than she could count. We laughed over old stories. Nights spent sneaking into concerts, weekends spent broke but happy, mornings where we swore we'd get our act together and never quite did. At some point, the conversation drifted to the list. "I can't believe we wrote that," she said, stirring cream into her coffee. "We were ambitious," I said with a grin. "Delusional," she corrected, laughing. "But ambitious, sure." We went through the items one by one, tallying our wins and losses. Northern Lights? Nope. Surfing? Not unless flailing counts. Matching tattoos? Definitely not. Did you ever manage the 48-hour thing? I asked. Mia groaned, resting her head on the table. "I made it to 36 once, and I cried, just like you said I would." "Told you." When we reached the last item on the list, meet up in 10 years, we both went quiet for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. "Well," she said softly, "at least we got one thing right." We stayed at the diner longer than we probably should have, the hours slipping by unnoticed. At one point, Mia leaned her head against the window, her breath fogging up the glass. "Do you think we turned out okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought about it for a moment, about all the ways life had gone off the rails, the things I wished I'd done differently, the things that had somehow turned out right despite everything. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think we did." She smiled at that, a soft, quiet smile that made my chest ache in the best way. When the sky outside started to lighten with the first hint of dawn, we both knew it was time to leave. Mia stood up, pulling on her coat, and I followed her out into the cool morning air. "So," she said, rocking back on her heels. "What now?" I shrugged. "We can make a new list." She grinned. "You think we'd do better this time?" "Probably not," I admitted, "but it might be fun to try." Mia laughed, bright and clear, like a promise. Before she left, she pulled me into a hug, holding on just a little longer than necessary. "Don't be a stranger this time, okay?" she whispered. "I won't," I promised, and for once I meant it. As she walked away, I stood there, watching her go, the sky turning pink and gold above us. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like the future was something I could hold on to. Maybe we didn't get everything right. Maybe we never would. But for now, this was enough. And that was all that mattered. It all started with a craving for pancakes. Nothing complicated, just fluffy, buttery, syrup-drenched pancakes. The kind that makes you feel for 10 minutes like everything in life is going to be okay. I figured I had everything I needed. A box of pancake mix, some eggs, milk. Easy, right? Wrong. The first problem hit immediately. No milk. I opened the fridge and stared at the empty shelf where the carton used to live, as if sheer willpower might make it reappear. Spoiler, it did not. I considered using water instead, but that felt like a crime against breakfast. And since going to the store was clearly out of the question, I was still in pajamas. I did what any reasonable person would do. I Googled pancakes without milk. Turns out you can substitute a lot of things for milk. Yogurt, heavy cream, even soda, yes, apparently that's a thing. Unfortunately, the only thing remotely close to dairy I had was a tub of French onion dip. And I knew, deep down, that no amount of desperation could justify that decision. Still, I was too far in to give up now. So I pivoted. Eggs and toast it is, I told myself. No big deal. A classic breakfast. I opened the carton of eggs and immediately discovered problem number 2. One lonely egg sitting at the bottom, mocking me. One egg. I muttered, as if it might apologize. What am I supposed to do with one egg? I considered scrambling it anyway, but that felt depressing. Like, congratulations, you've won the saddest breakfast of all time. At this point, a normal person might have given up and just made coffee. But not me. No, I was determined to have a real breakfast. I scanned the cabinets, hoping for a miracle. That's when I saw it. A half-forgotten bag of oatmeal sitting behind a box of stale cereal. Oatmeal. Yes. Not as exciting as pancakes, but functional. Nutritious. A solid plan. I dumped the oatmeal into a pot, added water, and turned on the stove. Things were finally looking up. While it cooked, I decided to be fancy and add a little cinnamon. Really elevate the experience. Unfortunately, the cinnamon was in the back of the spice cabinet, and as I reached for it, I knocked over half the contents of the shelf. Paprika, oregano, some jar of spice mix I didn't even recognize. The cinnamon jar hit the counter, popped open, and exploded like a tiny cinnamon grenade, covering everything in a fine brown dust. My hands, the stove, the oatmeal. Even the cat, who happened to be walking by, now smelled suspiciously like a holiday candle. Great, I muttered, waving cinnamon out of my face. The oatmeal bubbled angrily on the stove, as if it were fed up with me too. I managed to clean up most of the mess. Well, clean is a strong word. I brushed the cinnamon off the counter and told myself that a little extra spice in the oatmeal wouldn't hurt anyone. By the time I turned off the burner, the oatmeal had reached that perfect glue-like consistency that only oatmeal can achieve. I scooped it into a bowl, added a little honey, and sat down at the table, ready to enjoy my victory breakfast. I took one bite and immediately regretted everything. The oatmeal was terrible. Bland, somehow too sweet and too cinnamon-y at the same time, and the texture was like wet sand. I stared at the bowl in disbelief. How could something so simple go so wrong? For a moment, I sat there in silence, spoon in hand, contemplating the series of choices that had led me to this point. I thought about the pancakes that never happened, the single egg, the cinnamon explosion, and I realized something important. Sometimes you lose, not just at breakfast, at life. Sometimes things just don't work out no matter how hard you try. I sighed, pushed the oatmeal aside, and made a cup of coffee instead. Black, no frizz, no complications, just hot, bitter coffee, the lifeblood of the defeated. I took the coffee to the couch, curled up under a blanket, and let myself wallow for a bit. Because honestly, that's part of the process too. Some days you try your best, and things still go sideways. You spill the cinnamon, burn the oatmeal, run out of eggs, and it's okay to admit that it sucks. After a few minutes, I started to feel better. Not great, but better. The cat jumped up next to me, still smelling faintly of cinnamon, and gave me that slow blink cats do when they want to remind you that none of this matters in the grand scheme of things. And maybe she was right. Maybe the oatmeal disaster was just a blip, a dumb moment in a life full of dumb moments. I finished my coffee, put the oatmeal in the fridge because I wasn't quite ready to admit defeat, and decided to move on with my day. There was laundry to do, emails to answer, a world outside my apartment that didn't care about my breakfast failures. And that's the thing, I realized life keeps going, even when your pancakes don't happen. You keep showing up, trying again, making weird substitutions when you have to, and hoping the next bowl of oatmeal turns out a little better. And if it doesn't, there's always coffee. I was 22 and fresh out of college, riding that wave of freedom where every decision feels reckless but somehow still in control. My friends and I decided to go backpacking through Central America, an adventure we thought would be filled with beach days, volcano hikes, and endless bottles of cheap beer. It mostly was until we hit this small town at the edge of the jungle in Nicaragua. The town felt frozen in time. No streetlights, barely any tourists, and locals who eyed us like we had made the wrong kind of entrance. It gave me the creeps, but the hostel owner swore the river nearby was perfect for swimming. Clear water, no currents, she promised. So, we bought a few beers from the corner store and wandered down a dirt path into the jungle until we heard the sound of rushing water. It was beautiful, I won't lie. A deep turquoise river with smooth boulders lining the banks, water flowing lazily over rocks. We stripped down to our swimsuits, cracked open beers, and jumped right in. It was perfect. Until, of course, it wasn't. After about 20 minutes in the water, my friend Jason swam further upstream, shouting something about a cave he'd spotted along the bank. I followed, beer in hand, feeling buzzed and weightless. We climbed over some rocks, laughing, but as we rounded a bend, we saw something that made my skin crawl. A crocodile, big as a car, half submerged in the water, its eyes just above the surface. I froze. Jason froze. The damn thing was so close. I could see the way its scales shimmered in the late afternoon sun. It didn't move, just stared, as if it was deciding whether we were worth the trouble. I whispered, "Jason, don't make a sound. Just back away slowly." Of course, Jason being Jason, he didn't listen. He turned to run, splashing and stumbling over the rocks. The crocodile surged forward. It didn't lunge, just a calculated movement, but enough to close the distance between us in a heartbeat. Time warped. My brain split in two, one part screaming at me to run, the other forcing me to stay calm. I didn't move, barely even breathed, and somehow, the crocodile stopped, almost as if it got bored. Jason, meanwhile, had slipped on a wet rock and hit his knee, now writhing in pain and totally helpless. I couldn't leave him, but I couldn't move either. It felt like a terrible dream, one where you're paralyzed while something monstrous creeps closer. I remember thinking, so this is it. This is how I die. Mauled by a crocodile in the middle of nowhere, and no one will even know until they find our half-eaten bodies. But the thing is, nothing happened. The croc gave one last lazy flick of its tail, turned around, and disappeared under the water as silently as it had appeared. I stood there, heart hammering in my throat, waiting for it to pop back up. It didn't. Jason was still on the ground, groaning and clutching his leg. I had to drag his sorry ass back to the riverbank, both of us too scared to say anything. When we made it back to the others, they were sitting by the water, completely oblivious to what had just happened. "What took you guys so long?" one of them asked. Jason and I just looked at each other. "We saw a croc," he muttered, trying to play it cool, but his voice cracked halfway through. The others burst out laughing. "Yeah, right? We never spoke about it again. Not on that trip, not after we got back home. But to this day, every time I close my eyes and picture that thing's cold, unblinking stare, I get the same sinking feeling in my gut, the kind that reminds me how easily life can slip out of your grasp in an instant." I've been lying to my wife for 6 years about something small, so small, in fact, that sometimes I forget I'm lying about it. But when I remember, it feels like the weight of the world settles on my chest, and I can't breathe for a moment. It's not a big betrayal, not like cheating or gambling away our savings or anything. It's just this tiny, stupid thing that started as a joke, but it grew, and now I have no idea how to undo it. I told her I love coffee. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, how hard would it be to just say, "Oh, by the way, I don't actually like coffee." But it's been 6 years now. 6 long years of sipping bitter, over-roasted, acidic sludge every morning, making noises that sound like satisfaction when they're really stifled gags. It's become part of our routine. She makes coffee in the morning, brings me a cup, and we sit on the couch, sipping silently while we scroll through our phones. I think it's one of her favorite parts of the day, and that's the problem, isn't it? It makes her happy. It makes her feel connected to me. And every time I think about telling her the truth, I imagine the confusion, maybe even hurt, flickering across her face. It all started the first morning I stayed over at her apartment. I didn't drink coffee back then. I was more of a tea guy, green tea specifically, the kind with jasmine. But when she shuffled out of the kitchen with that hopeful look in her eyes, holding a steaming cup of what smelled like burnt toast, I panicked. It was early in our relationship, and I didn't want to be that guy, the one with weird preferences who complicates everything. So I smiled, thanked her, and took a sip. I thought, I could choke down one cup. No big deal. But she looked so pleased, so pleased. She leaned in and kissed my cheek, whispering, "I knew you were a coffee person." And before I knew it, I was nodding along, saying something dumb like, Yeah, I don't know how I'd survive without it. I didn't mean to lie. It just happened, and it should have ended there. But the next morning, she handed me another cup, and then it became a habit. A ritual. Now, 6 years later, I'm trapped in this weird, caffeine-fueled lie. It's like being in a play that never ends, and I'm stuck in character delivering the same lines over and over. This is good. Oh, is that a new roast? Nice. I've even developed a routine for drinking it. Small sips, spaced out enough to make it seem like I'm enjoying it, but never enough to finish the whole cup. I pour half of it down the sink when she's not looking, rinsing the mug like I'm erasing evidence. Sometimes on bad days, I pour the entire cup down the drain as soon as she leaves the room. But then I feel guilty, like I've betrayed her in some fundamental way. The worst part? She started buying me coffee-themed gifts. Mugs with quirky sayings, expensive beans from local roasters, even a French press last Christmas. I have no idea how to use it, but I acted thrilled when I opened it, grinning like an idiot while thinking, what the hell have I done to deserve this? I've gotten weirdly good at pretending to be a coffee enthusiast. I know just enough jargon to get by. Single origin, pour over, cold brew. Though I have no clue what any of it really means. I've memorized the names of her favorite coffee shops and developed fake opinions about them. Oh, their espresso is a bit too acidic for my taste, I'll say, nodding sagely while inside I'm screaming. But it's not just the coffee. It's everything it represents. It's the shared moments, the quiet mornings together, the feeling that we understand each other in ways no one else does. She once told me that coffee reminds her of home, that growing up, her mom would always make a pot in the morning, and the smell would fill the house. It makes me feel safe, she said, resting her head on my shoulder. And I knew, in that moment, that my lie wasn't just a silly thing anymore. It was a part of our relationship, woven into the fabric of who we are as a couple. I think about telling her sometimes. I imagine sitting her down, taking her hand and saying, "Listen, there's something I need to tell you." And in my mind, she laughs, brushing it off like it's no big deal. You don't like coffee? That's it? God, I thought you were going to say something serious. But what if she doesn't laugh? What if it's one of those moments where you realize that something small isn't actually small at all? What if she feels betrayed? What if she starts questioning everything else? If he lied about this, what else has he lied about? And so, I keep drinking the damn coffee. I keep smiling and nodding and pretending, because the alternative is terrifying. The alternative is admitting that I've built part of our relationship on a stupid, pointless lie. Sometimes I wonder what it says about me that I can't come clean about something so trivial. Am I just a coward? Or is it something deeper? Maybe I'm afraid that if I let this one thing unravel, everything else will follow. Maybe I'm afraid that the version of me she loves, the coffee-drinking, quirky, dependable guy, isn't really me at all. The other day, she surprised me with a trip to a new coffee roastery that just opened downtown. She was so excited, practically bouncing in her seat as we drove there. "You're gonna love it," she kept saying, and I smiled, gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. The place was beautiful. Exposed brick walls, the smell of roasting beans, hipsters in flannel shirts bustling behind the counter. We sat down, and she ordered for both of us some fancy pour-over thing with a name I couldn't pronounce. When the coffee arrived, she watched me expectantly, waiting for my reaction. I took a sip, and for a moment, I considered telling her the truth. I imagined setting the cup down, looking her in the eye, and saying, "I need to tell you something." But then she smiled, that warm, radiant smile that makes my heart ache, and I couldn't do it. So I took another sip, forcing a grin, and said, "Wow, this is really good." And maybe that's the truth in a way. Not the coffee part. That's still awful, but the rest of it. The shared moment, the connection, the love. That part is real. At least I hope it is. I'll never forget this one time I tried to read the signs like all the advice online says. Spoiler, I misread everything. I was at this small coffee shop just trying to kill time before meeting a friend. You know, the kind of hipster place where the baristas wear beanies even in the summer, and they write your name wrong on purpose like it's some form of abstract art. Anyway, I saw this girl sitting at the corner table with a book. The kind of effortlessly cool type that makes you feel like you're underdressed just by existing near them. She was all tucked in her novel, sipping a cappuccino like she lived in some indie film. I figured, What the hell? Here's my moment. Be casual, just like everyone says. I walked up, heart doing that annoying thing where it decides to race like you're on a roller coaster, even though all you're doing is talking to another human being. I start with, "Hey, that was like a good book. What's it about?" Immediately, she gave me that polite half smile that says, "I'd rather be anywhere else right now, but I have social obligations to fulfill." That was strike one. But did I stop? No, of course not. I doubled down. I continued like a fool. I used to read a lot too, until the internet ruined my attention span. She gave this little laugh, and I thought, okay, I've got a foothold here. So, naturally, I pushed a bit further. I gestured toward her drink. "You've got good taste in coffee too." That's rare, because, there's nothing like subtly insulting everyone else in the room to win someone over, right? She just blinked at me. The kind of blink that makes you realize she's not impressed with your game or your commentary on the caffeine industry. And that's when it hit me, headphones. She had earbuds in the entire time. One of them dangling slightly below her hair, which I didn't notice because, surprise, I was too busy trying to read the signs and convince myself I could pull off being charming. I panicked. Instead of gracefully excusing myself, I did the worst thing imaginable. I tried to recover. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." I stammered, like that wasn't already painfully obvious. And then, in what can only be described as a catastrophic lapse in judgment, I reached into my pocket and handed her one of my business cards, saying, "In case you ever, want to finish this conversation or grab coffee again sometime." She stared at the card like I'd handed her a live grenade. And the worst part? The card wasn't even cool. It was a leftover from a temp job I had 3 years ago, complete with an outdated phone number and an email address that sounded like something a teenager would come up with. She glanced between the card and me, gave a small nod, and said, "Thanks," in the tone you'd use when receiving a flyer for a pyramid scheme. As I backed away, I realized two things simultaneously. One, I had somehow made the situation exponentially more awkward than it needed to be. Two, the barista behind the counter had been watching the whole disaster unfold with the kind of secondhand embarrassment that makes you want to dissolve into the floor. I managed to make it out of the coffee shop with my dignity in tatters, but the humiliation wasn't over. Later that week, I bumped into her again, this time at a bookstore. Because, of course, we locked eyes briefly, and I gave her this awkward, half-hearted wave, as if to say, "Hey, remember me?" The walking embarrassment from the coffee shop. She gave me a polite but dismissive nod before diving back into browsing the romance section. At that point, I realized something crucial. It wasn't about what I said or how cool I tried to act. The signs I was looking for, they didn't matter. What mattered was that I ignored the giant blinking "do not disturb" signal that was her whole vibe that day. Headphones, book, coffee, those aren't invitations, they're shields. And I crashed right through them, thinking I could charm my way past. So lesson learned. If someone's in their own bubble, respect it. No matter how good your intentions are, they aren't a free pass to bulldoze someone's space. And for the love of everything caffeinated, leave the business cards at home. I didn't see it coming. That's what haunts me the most. How easy it was to cross a line I didn't even know was there until it was too late. It started simple enough, just like these things always do. My friend Leo asked me to house sit while his mom, Sabrina, went on a weekend trip with some friends. Leo was staying with his girlfriend for the weekend, and they needed someone to keep an eye on the place and water the plants. I figured it was an easy gig. Hang out, watch some TV, and maybe raid the fridge. I'd known Sabrina for years. She was like family, and I never gave it a second thought. Sabrina was different from other moms. She had this energy about her, always moving, always doing something. She was sharp, funny, and beautiful in that way people don't talk about out loud. Tall, dark hair streaked with silver, always with a sarcastic smile, like she knew things you didn't. Leo used to joke about how all our friends thought his mom was hot, and we'd laugh it off. I never thought I'd be the one to prove him right. The first night was quiet. I watered her plants, fed the cat, and made myself at home on the couch. Around 10 p.m., she came back unexpectedly. Her trip got canceled last minute. She looked tired, but not in a bad way, like she was relieved to be home instead of spending the weekend pretending to have fun. "Hope I didn't ruin your night," she said, kicking off her shoes. "Nah, no worries. I said, sitting up on the couch. I was just gonna binge Netflix and pass out anyway. She smiled. Well, I could use some company. Mind sticking around? It felt harmless enough. Sabrina opened a bottle of wine, and we ended up sitting on the back patio, talking about life. The conversation flowed easily. She told me about her divorce, how lonely the house felt now that Leo was spending most of his time with his girlfriend. I told her about my crappy job, my non-existent love life, and how weird adulthood had turned out to be. There was a moment, just a flicker, when the conversation dipped into something deeper. She gave me this look, one that lingered a second too long. I should have laughed it off, should have excused myself, but I didn't. I always like having you around, she said softly, swirling her wine. You were always different. Different how? I asked, feeling my heart pick up speed. She gave me that sly smile. Just, you notice things. Not a lot of people do. The air between us shifted, suddenly too thick, too warm. I knew this was the point where I should have made an excuse and gone home. But I stayed. Sabrina leaned in a little closer, her arm brushing against mine. You've grown up, she whispered, her voice low, almost like she was testing me. And then I kissed her. I don't know what I was thinking, or maybe I wasn't thinking at all. Her lips were soft, and for a second, I thought she'd push me away. But she didn't. She kissed me back. The world narrowed to just the two of us. It wasn't slow or gentle. It was desperate, like we were both drowning, and the only way to breathe was through each other. We stumbled back into the house, barely making it to the living room before clothes started coming off. The next few hours were a blur of tangled limbs and whispered names. When it was over, we lay there on the floor, the room dark except for the faint glow from the streetlights outside. My heart was still pounding, but reality was already starting to settle in. This, I whispered, my voice shaky. This was a bad idea. Yeah, she said, though there was no regret in her voice. It was. We both knew it wouldn't stop there. And it didn't. The next day, she texted me. Just a casual message. Nothing incriminating, but the meaning behind it was clear. We started sneaking around, meeting late at night, pretending it was harmless even though we both knew it wasn't. Every time I told myself it would be the last. And every time I came back, it was thrilling, addictive. But the guilt gnawed at me, especially whenever Leo called to hang out. I could barely look him in the eye without feeling like the world's biggest piece of shit. It all came crashing down one Saturday afternoon. Leo showed up unexpectedly while I was at Sabrina's place. We'd thought he was out for the day, but there he was, standing in the doorway, staring at us like we were strangers. What the fuck? Leo whispered, his voice low and cold. I scrambled to pull on my shirt, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. You! His voice cracked, the anger barely contained. You were hooking up with my mom? Leo, How long? He demanded, his fists clenched at his sides. How fucking long? I couldn't lie. A few weeks. The betrayal in his eyes was worse than any punch could have been. You were my best friend, he whispered, his voice breaking. How could you do this? There was nothing I could say to make it right. Nothing that would undo what I'd done. Get out, Leo said, his face a mix of rage and heartbreak. Leo, please. Get the fuck out. I left without another word, my chest tight with regret. Sabrina tried to reach out after that, but it was over. Whatever we'd had wasn't worth the price we paid. Leo blocked me on everything, phone, social media, the works. I tried once to apologize, but he never responded. And honestly, I don't blame him. It's been a few years now, and the memory still stings. Not just the guilt, but the way I lost Leo. How I threw away years of friendship for something fleeting and selfish. Some mistakes you move on from. Others stick with you, like a scar that never quite fades. And this one, it's the kind that never stops bleeding. We met at a music festival. I went with a group of friends, mostly just to get out of the house and shake off the monotony of work and Netflix. I wasn't looking for anything more than a fun night of live music, overpriced beer, and maybe some bad dance moves. But somewhere between the second band and the food truck line, I saw him. He smiled at me like we shared a secret, like he knew something about the world that I didn't, and I wanted to know what it was. We started talking between sets. It It wasn't some magical love at first sight moment, but it was easy. He had this calm energy, the kind that makes you feel like everything is a little less chaotic. We wandered away from the crowd, found a quieter spot under some fairy lights, and spent the rest of the night talking about everything. Music, travel, weird childhood stories. He told me he played the guitar, but only for himself. I told him I was terrible at keeping houseplants alive, but kept buying them anyway. He laughed, and I swear it felt like I'd known him forever. At the end of the night, when we were both tired and tipsy, he asked if I wanted to meet up again. "I think we'd have a good time," he said, so casual, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I gave him my number, and we made plans for the following weekend. The first date turned into a second, then a third. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was simple, easy in a way that felt new to me. He'd show up with a coffee for me, knowing exactly how I liked it. We'd walk through flea markets and talk for hours about nothing in particular. He didn't make grand promises, but he was there, showing up in all the little ways that count. I remember thinking this might actually be it. This might be what it feels like to build something real. But then, almost imperceptibly, things started to shift. At first, it was small, an unanswered text here, a canceled plan there. "Sorry, work's been crazy," he'd say, and I'd tell myself not to read into it. People get busy. Life happens. But the missed calls and rescheduled dates started to pile up, and before I knew it, I was spending more time waiting on him than being with him. I kept hoping things would go back to the way they were in the beginning, but instead, it felt like I was chasing a ghost of what we used to be. The hardest part was that he didn't disappear all at once. He stayed just enough to keep me hoping, just enough to make me think that maybe if I tried harder or was more patient, things would get better. But they didn't. The more I reached out, the further he pulled away, like he was slowly slipping through my fingers no matter how tightly I tried to hold on. One night, after yet another canceled plan, I finally broke. I sat on my bed, staring at my phone, and I knew I had to say something. I couldn't keep pretending I was okay with the way things were unraveling. So I sent him a text. "Can we talk? I need to know if you're still in this." The dots appeared, then disappeared. I held my breath, waiting for his response, knowing that whatever he said next would change everything. When the message finally came, it was short, almost clinical. "I care about you, but I don't think I can be what you need right now." That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just a neatly packaged rejection disguised as kindness. I read it over and over, hoping it would make more sense the fifth or sixth time, but it didn't. I wanted to ask him why he started something he had no intention of finishing, why he made me believe this time would be different. But I didn't. I just wrote back, "Okay, take care." And that was the last thing I ever said to him. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself I was fine. I went out with friends, deleted his number, and told myself that it was better this way, better to know now than to drag things out any longer. But the truth is it hurt. It hurt in that deep, quiet way that lingers beneath the surface, like a bruise you keep forgetting about until you accidentally press on it. I wasn't just mourning the end of whatever we had, I was mourning the person I thought he was, the future I let myself imagine with him. Some nights, I'd catch myself scrolling through old messages, trying to find the exact moment when it all went wrong. I kept thinking that if I could just pinpoint the mistake, I'd finally be able to let it go. But there was no single moment, no clear ending. Just a slow, quiet unraveling. And that's the hardest part about these kinds of losses. They don't come with closure. There's no final conversation, no clean break. Just silence where there used to be something, leaving you to fill in the blanks on your own. It's been a few months now, and I'd love to say I've moved on completely, but that would be a lie. Some days I feel strong, like I've finally put it behind me, like I've learned the lesson and come out better for it. But other days, the sadness sneaks up on me when I least expect it. I'll hear a song we listen to or see something that reminds me of him, and suddenly I'm right back in that place, missing someone who was never really mine to begin with. But here's what I know now. Not every story needs an ending. Not every person you meet is meant to stay. Some people come into your life to teach you something, even if the lesson is just how to let go. And as painful as that lesson is, it's one I needed to learn. These days, I'm trying to be kinder to myself. I'm learning that it's okay to feel hurt, that it's okay to miss someone even after they've gone. But I'm also learning that my worth isn't tied to someone else's ability to stay. I deserve someone who shows up, who makes me feel wanted, not like an option they can pick up or put down when it's convenient. I still believe in love, even after all of this. Not the grand, cinematic kind, but the real, messy, imperfect kind, the kind where people stay even when things get hard. And maybe one day, I'll find that. But until then, I'll keep showing up for myself, building a life I love, one small piece at a time. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. I am enough. With or without someone else, I am enough. And that's a kind of peace no one can take from me. The first time I tried to flirt with a barista, I accidentally ordered 5 muffins. Not on purpose, although in hindsight, it probably looked like I was trying to stockpile baked goods for the apocalypse. It started because I'd been going to the same coffee shop every Saturday for weeks, mostly out of laziness, but partly because of her. She worked the morning shift. This effortlessly cool barista with curly hair, a nose ring, and a smile that could make anyone forget how to form coherent thoughts. I'd been trying to work up the courage to talk to her for weeks, but all I ever managed was a mumbled thanks when she handed me my latte. Real smooth. This time, though, I had a plan. I was going to say something, anything to start a conversation. No more cowardly head nods. No more awkward half smiles. Just a simple, charming exchange. How hard could it be? When I got to the counter, she smiled, that smile, and said, "Hey there, what can I get you?" And that's when my brain decided to betray me. "I'll have a cappuccino," I blurted way too fast. "And 5 muffins. 5 muffins. What the hell, Jake?" Her eyebrows went up, but she didn't laugh. 5 muffins? That's ambitious. I could have corrected myself right there, told her it was a mistake. But for some reason, possibly panic, possibly a deep-seated fear of embarrassment, I just nodded. "Yep, 5 muffins. Big day." "Okay," she said, clearly trying to hold back a laugh. "Any specific kind, or just a random assortment?" Surprise me," I said, immediately regretting it. Who even says that? Who walks into a coffee shop and demands a muffin surprise? She grinned as she rang up my order. "Living dangerously, huh?" "Always," I muttered, wondering if it was possible to disappear into thin air out of sheer embarrassment. I paid for my ridiculous order and shuffled over to the pickup counter, mentally kicking myself the entire time. "Great job, Jake. You really wowed her with that muffin confidence." A few minutes later, she appeared behind the counter with a tray. Yes, an entire tray of muffins. "Here you go," she said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. 5 muffins, one of each kind. I stared at the tray, suddenly realizing the enormity of my mistake. These weren't tiny muffins. They were the jumbo, could feed a family for a week kind. "Wow," I said weakly. "That's a lot of muffin." She laughed, a bright, genuine laugh that made my heart do somersaults. "Yeah, it is. You want a bag for those?" No, I said, because apparently I was committed to my muffin disaster. "I'll just carry them." Her eyes crinkled at the corners as she watched me awkwardly scoop the muffins into my arms like a lunatic gathering fallen fruit. "Do you really love muffins?" she asked, still smiling. This was my moment. My chance to turn this whole mess into a charming story instead of a cautionary tale. "Actually," I said, holding the muffins like they were a bouquet, "I was hoping one of them could be a peace offering, in case I said anything awkward just now." Her smile widened, and for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely hopeless. "I think you're off the hook," she said, "but I'll take a muffin if you're offering." I grinned like an idiot. "Pick your favorite. It's on me." She reached out, grabbed a blueberry muffin from the top of the pile, and gave me a playful look. "Thanks. This makes up for the weirdest order I've had all week." We stood there for a moment, both of us grinning like fools. And then, because I'm nothing if not consistent, I nearly dropped the remaining 4 muffins onto the floor. "Smooth," she teased, catching one before it could roll off the counter. "Thanks," I muttered, cradling the survivors like they were precious cargo. I think I've reached my muffin-carrying limit." She laughed again, and in that moment, I knew I had to go for it. "So," I said, shifting the muffins awkwardly in my arms, "since we've already bonded over baked goods, how about coffee sometime? Somewhere that doesn't require me to order half the bakery." She tilted her head, clearly considering it. "You know what?" she said, her grin softening. "That actually sounds nice." My heart skipped a beat. "Really?" "Really," she said, pulling a pen from her apron. "Here." She scribbled her number on one of the paper bags and handed it to me with a wink. "Just maybe no more muffin emergencies." I laughed, feeling a rush of relief and excitement all at once. "Deal." As I walked out of the coffee shop, juggling muffins and a phone number, I couldn't help but grin. Sure, I'd made an absolute fool of myself, but somehow, against all odds, it had worked. And honestly, those muffins were delicious. It was one of those nights that wasn't supposed to mean anything. Just me and Alex hanging out like we always did, drinking beers on my balcony and talking about everything except the things that mattered. We'd had nights like this 100 times before, long, lazy conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. Except this one felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something in the air between us had shifted. Maybe it was the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, or the way his laugh sounded a little softer than usual, like he was holding something back. Whatever it was, I felt it, this quiet, electric hum between us that had been building for years. I told myself not to read into it. We were best friends. We had rules, unspoken, but clear. We didn't cross that line. And for years, I've been fine with that. Or at least I thought I had. But that night, with the city lights flickering in the distance and the beer making everything feel a little too easy, I found myself leaning closer to him, just to see what would happen. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, you." "Yeah," he said, but his gaze didn't leave mine. And just like that, the space between us disappeared. It wasn't a slow kiss or careful. It was messy and rushed and filled with every unspoken thing we'd buried for years. And the second our lips met, I knew that there was no going back from this. We stumbled inside, tripping over shoes and each other, laughing into kisses that felt too good to stop. And when we finally made it to my bed, it was like every wall between us came crashing down. Years of friendship, trust, and quiet longing wrapped up in the way his hands found my skin and the way we breathed each other's names like a promise we couldn't keep. Afterward, we lay there, tangled in each other, the room still spinning from what we'd just done. His arm was draped over my waist, my head resting on his chest, and for a moment I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something. "This doesn't have to be a big deal," he whispered, his voice cautious. I should have told him the truth. Should have told him that for me it already was a big deal, that it had been for a long time. But instead, I smiled against his skin and whispered, "Yeah, it's not a big deal." And just like that, we pretended it wasn't. For the next few weeks, we existed in this strange in-between, friends most of the time, lovers when it felt right, but never more than that. We didn't talk about what we were doing or what it meant. We just kept moving forward, hoping that if we didn't look too closely, it would all make sense eventually. But it didn't. The more time we spent together, the harder it became for me to keep pretending I was okay with being just something casual. Every time he left my bed, it felt like a piece of me left with him. And every time he kissed me goodbye, I wanted to ask him to stay, really stay, but the words never came. Because the thing about Alex is he's the kind of person who never stays in one place too long. He's always chasing the next adventure, always looking for the next new thing. And me? I was just the thing that made sense for now. I knew that. I knew it from the beginning, but knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. It all came crashing down one night, as these things always do. We were lying in bed, the glow from the streetlights filtering through the curtains, and I could feel the words bubbling up inside me, the ones I'd been too scared to say. "I think I love you," I whispered, my voice breaking around the edges. He froze beside me, his body stiff against mine. And in that silence, I knew he didn't feel the same. "Don't do this," he said quietly, his breath shaky. "Please." "Do what?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes full of regret. "You know I care about you, but not like that." The words hit me harder than I expected, even though I'd been preparing for them all along. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest, like the air had been sucked out of the room. But I smiled anyway, because what else was I supposed to do? "It's fine," I whispered. "I get it. You stayed the night. but we both knew it was over. Not just the sex, but the friendship too. Because once you cross that line, you can't go back. Not really. The next morning, he kissed me goodbye, soft and lingering, like he wanted to apologize without saying the words. And I let him. I let him walk away, because I knew if I asked him to stay, it would only hurt more. We tried to stay friends after that, but it didn't work. Every conversation felt like a reminder of what we'd lost. Every laugh a little too forced, every silence a little too loud. And slowly, painfully, we drifted apart. Not because we wanted to, but because we didn't know how to be anything else. It's been months now, and I still think about him. I still catch myself scrolling through old photos, rereading our texts, wondering where it all went wrong. I miss him. I miss the way he made me laugh, the way everything felt lighter when he was around. But most of all, I miss the version of me that existed when I was with him. The one who believed, even for a little while, that love could be simple. People say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best thing you'll ever do or the worst mistake you'll ever make. For me, it was both. For a little while, I had him, and even though it ended, even though it hurt more than I ever thought it could, I wouldn't take it back. Because some people come into your life just to pass through, leaving you with memories that will ache in the best ways long after they're gone. And even though it hurts, God, does it hurt? I'm still grateful. Because for a little while, he was mine. And even if I never have that again, at least I know what it feels like to love someone that much. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have. He sat there like a statue, mouth slightly open, as if the words were stuck somewhere between his throat and brain. For a moment, I thought he was going to deny it all. Tell me I'd gone crazy or twisted somehow, so that I'd end up apologizing to him for checking his phone. But then something in him shifted. He exhaled long and heavy, and I saw it, relief. The kind of relief you see when someone's been holding their breath underwater for too long and finally breaks the surface. You weren't supposed to find out like this, he mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. Like this. As if there were some magical way to make finding out that your partner is cheating feel good. I just sat there, my mouth dry, waiting for him to explain. But instead of an apology, what came out of his mouth next was something I wasn't prepared for. I love her. I remember feeling like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the fact that it wasn't some meaningless fling, some random mistake he'd apologize for and beg forgiveness over. He loved her. And just like that, the foundation of everything we had, everything we were, crumbled beneath me. I don't know how long I sat there, numb and silent. Time seemed to stretch and bend in on itself. When I finally found my voice, it sounded foreign to my own ears. How long? He hesitated. That little flicker of hesitation was worse than the confession itself, because it told me there was more. Almost a year. A whole year. While I was making plans for our future, he was living a double life. And the worst part? All those nights, I stayed awake worrying, doubting myself, blaming myself for the distance between us. He'd already made his choice. He just didn't have the guts to tell me. So what now? I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to sound calm. You just walk away? Throw everything we built away for her? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he did something I'll never forget. He reached across the table and tried to grab my hand, as if somehow that would make it all better. I pulled away like his touch had burned me, my stomach twisting in knots. Don't, I whispered. You don't get to do that. He slumped back into his seat, defeated. I never wanted to hurt you, he said, and the pathetic thing was I think he meant it. But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't care about your intentions. It still slices you open all the same. I told him to leave. There was no yelling, no dramatic exit. He just nodded, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door like it was any other night. Like he was just running to the store and would be back in 15 minutes. But the silence he left behind was deafening. I sat there for hours, staring at the spot where he'd been, waiting for the numbness to wear off so I could feel something, anything. But all that came was emptiness. The days that followed were a blur. I called in sick to work, unable to face the world with the weight of my shattered heart pressing down on my chest. Friends reached out, offering condolences like someone had died. In a way, someone had The version of me that believed in us, that believed in him. She was gone, buried beneath the rubble of broken trust and unanswered questions. And then came the worst part, the pictures. They showed up in my Instagram feed, courtesy of a mutual friend who hadn't yet realized what had happened. There they were, him and her, smiling in some quaint little cafe, holding hands like they didn't have a care in the world, like I had never existed. It hit me then like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just moving on, he already had. And all the while, I was still stuck in place, trying to make sense of the mess he'd left behind. I deleted Instagram that night. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing more of them, more of the life they were building on the ashes of the one I thought we had. In the weeks that followed, I did all the things you're supposed to do after a breakup. I changed my locks, boxed up his things, and tossed out anything that reminded me of him. I went out with friends, drank too much wine, and let them convince me that I'd dodged a bullet. But no matter how hard I tried to move on, there was always that nagging voice in the back of my mind, whispering, what if? What if I'd caught him sooner? What if I'd confronted him earlier? What if I'd been more attentive, more affectionate, more something? It's a dangerous game, that what-if game. It's like quicksand. It pulls you in deeper the more you struggle. But then one day, something shifted. It wasn't a big, dramatic moment, just a quiet realization. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when I looked around and realized I felt lighter, like the weight I'd been carrying had finally started to lift. And that's when it hit me. I didn't miss him. I missed the idea of him, the version of him that existed only in my head. The one who wouldn't have lied, who wouldn't have betrayed me, who would have fought for us. And just like that, I knew I was going to be okay. Not right away, and not all at once, but eventually. Because the truth is, some people come into your life to teach you what love isn't. And as painful as that lesson is, it's one worth learning. A few months later, I ran into him at a coffee shop. He looked the same crooked smile, same stupid leather jacket he thought made him look cool. But something was different. He wasn't the man I remembered, the one I had loved so deeply. He was just a stranger with a familiar face. And that's when I knew, without a doubt, that I had finally let him go. He gave me a small, awkward wave, as if testing the waters. I smiled back, polite but distant. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet sense of closure. He was my past, a chapter in a book I had already finished reading. And now, it was time to start a new one. This happened last winter, and I still don't know how I made it out. I had gone on a solo trip to this cabin up in the mountains. It wasn't my first time doing something like that. Being alone in the woods was my way of clearing my head, getting away from work, people, and all the noise of life. I'd found a cabin on a rental site. Nothing fancy, just a small place with a wood stove, a tiny kitchen, and one bedroom. Perfect for a few days off-grid. The drive up was peaceful, snow dusting the pine trees along the road, and the air sharp and clean. By the time I reached the cabin, it was late afternoon, and the temperature had dropped. I unloaded my gear, started a fire in the stove, and made myself some coffee. The place was quiet, eerily so, but that's what I'd wanted. Just me and the mountains. The first night was uneventful. I sat by the fire, read a book, and fell asleep to the sound of wind brushing against the windows. I felt good, relaxed even. That was the last night I felt normal. The second day, a snowstorm rolled in. Thick flakes blew sideways, and within a few hours, the cabin was buried in white. I had enough food and wood to last for days, so I wasn't worried. I actually liked the idea of being snowed in. Something about the isolation made it feel even cozier. But then things started happening. That evening, just as I was getting ready to settle in for the night, I heard something outside. A soft thump against the wall, like something heavy had fallen or been thrown against the side of the cabin. I froze listening. Then it came again. Thump, right by the window. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it outside, but all I could see was snow swirling in the wind. Nothing unusual, just the storm. I told myself it was probably a branch that had snapped and brushed against the wall. I went back inside, bolted the door, and tried to forget about it. But the sound came back. Over the next hour, I heard it again and again, soft, deliberate thumps moving slowly around the cabin. One by one, the sounds crept along the walls, like something was circling the building. The snowstorm howled outside, but under the wind, I could hear the thump, 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 steady, rhythmic, almost patient. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind knocking something loose, or maybe an animal. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. No animal moves like that. No animal makes those sounds. And then, right around midnight, the knocking stopped. For a moment, I thought it was over. I let out a shaky breath and tried to calm my racing heart. I was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, when I heard it. A soft, deliberate tap, 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 right on the window. I nearly dropped the flashlight. The tapping was slow and precise, like someone was gently rapping their knuckles against the glass. I turned toward the window, every muscle in my body screaming not to look. But I had to. I had to see. I shone the flashlight at the window. There was nothing there. Just snow, dark trees, and my own reflection staring back at me through the glass. I let out a shaky laugh. Just the wind, I whispered to myself. You're being paranoid. Then my reflection smiled. My heart stopped. I hadn't smiled, but the version of me in the window, it grinned, slowly, too wide. The kind of smile that feels like a mask stretched over something pretending to be human. And then it raised its hand and tapped on the other side of the glass. Top, top, top. I scrambled back from the window, my legs nearly giving out. My breath was coming in ragged gasps, and my brain was screaming that what I'd seen wasn't possible. But it was, the reflection wasn't me. I sat there, paralyzed, staring at the window. The reflection stayed perfectly still, that horrible grin plastered across its face. And then slowly, it tilted its head, as if studying me, and whispered, "Come outside." The voice was muffled, like it was speaking through layers of glass and snow. But it was my voice. I backed away, grabbing the poker from the fireplace. The thing behind the glass didn't move, just stood there, smiling, waiting. Then it spoke again. "You're cold, aren't you?" I ran. I didn't know where to go, but I couldn't stay near that window. I locked myself in the bedroom and shoved the dresser in front of the door. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely turn the lock. I sat on the bed, clutching the fireplace poker, listening. For a long time, there was silence. Just the wind outside, howling through the cracks in the cabin walls. And then I heard it again, soft footsteps crunching in the snow, moving slowly around the cabin. Top, top, top. It moved from window to window, tapping gently each time. I sat in the dark, heart hammering, waiting for it to leave. But it didn't. It circled the cabin over and over, tapping on every window, whispering in my voice, "Come outside." I don't know how long it went on. Hours maybe. But just before dawn, the tapping stopped. When the first light of morning crept through the cracks in the curtains, I finally dared to move. I opened the bedroom door, poker still in hand, and crept through the cabin. The windows were fogged over, frost clinging to the glass, but there were no handprints. No footprints outside, just the untouched blanket of snow. I packed my things in under 5 minutes and left without looking back. I didn't care that the storm hadn't cleared. I drove through the snow, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, heart pounding the whole way down the mountain. When I got home, I tried to forget about the cabin. Tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion or maybe a vivid dream. But a few days later, I noticed something strange. There was a handprint on the outside of my apartment window. And sometimes late at night, when the room is dark and the air feels too cold, I hear it again. Top, top, top. And I know one day, I'll hear it from the other side of the glass. And when I do, it won't be asking anymore. The first thing on my list? Megachurch pastors flying around in private jets while asking their followers to sow the seed and donate money they don't have. These guys are living like rock stars, mansions, luxury cars, designer clothes, while telling the congregation that their financial struggles are just a test from God. Meanwhile, your grandma is skipping lunch so she can still send her monthly $20 to Pastor Jetsetter. It's spiritual extortion at this point. If I had my way, megachurches would have to pay taxes just like the rest of us. And I mean big taxes like Jeff Bezos level taxes. Jesus didn't flip tables in the temple, so some dude named Chad could buy a Lamborghini. Honestly, If we're taxing Girl Scout cookie sales, why does a multimillionaire preacher get a pass? You can't tell me that a kid hustling Thin Mints out of a foldable table is a bigger threat to the economy than these nonprofits. And let's be real. If your church owns more real estate than the Monopoly board, it's not a church. It's a real estate empire with bonus sermons. Another thing that's long overdue for prohibition: stock buybacks. I'm tired of hearing how companies are rewarding shareholders by buying their own stocks back. Translation? They're inflating their stock price without actually doing anything useful, like, making better products or paying their workers. Meanwhile, the execs cash out their options and leave the employees scrambling for rent money. It's corporate snake oil, and we're all drinking it. Back in the day, stock buybacks were illegal for exactly this reason, because they encourage corruption. Now, it's legal again, and every major company treats it like a cheat code for quick profits. They'll tell you, we need to cut costs to stay competitive, and then lay off half the staff while throwing billions at stock buybacks. The logic is so backward it makes my brain hurt. It's like someone setting their house on fire to save on heating bills. If you ask me, stock buybacks should come with a trade-off. If you want to do them, you also have to give every laid-off employee a golden parachute. Fair's fair, right? And while we're talking about corporate crimes, let's make environmental destruction actually hurt for the people responsible. The penalties these companies get hit with are a joke, like, oops, sorry we poisoned the river. Here's a $50,000 fine. Meanwhile, they made billions polluting in the first place. It's the equivalent of stealing a car, getting caught, and only having to pay for the gas you used. No wonder they keep doing it. If I were in charge, I'd change the rules. For every oil spill, chemical dump, or illegal logging operation, the executives responsible would have to personally clean up the mess, suits and ties included. And no hiring people to do it for them, either. I want to see CEOs out there with buckets, scrubbing rocks and rescuing turtles. Maybe then they'll think twice before treating the earth like their personal trash bin. But you know what else should be banned? News outlets spreading blatant lies with no consequences. Remember that time you read some headline, got outraged, and then found out 2 days later that the entire story was wrong? And the correction, if it even happens, gets buried 6 paragraphs deep, like, oops, our bad. Meanwhile, the damage is already done. People are marching in the streets, relationships are ruined, and your aunt is posting conspiracy theories on Facebook. It's chaos, and it's exhausting. If news companies want to act like they're the guardians of truth, then they need to be held accountable. Every retraction should come with the same energy as the original lie. Breaking news ticker, front page coverage, the works. And if they don't, find them. Hit them where it hurts. Their ad revenue. Maybe then they'll think twice before running sensational garbage just for clicks. And speaking of garbage, let's talk about shrinkflation. You know the game. Companies keep the prices the same, but they give you less product. One day, you're buying a bag of chips, and the next day, it's half air. Same package, same price, fewer chips. They think we won't notice, but we do. Oh, we do. I recently bought a candy bar, and I swear it was the size of a fun-size version, but without the fun. At this point, it's not even shrinkflation, it's daylight robbery. What makes it worse is how shameless they are about it. They'll slap new and improved on the label like they did us a favor by making everything smaller. I say we start calling it what it really is, corporate pickpocketing, and it should be treated as a crime. If I walk into a store and pay for 10 ounces of coffee, I expect to get 10 ounces, not 8 ounces in a deceptively large bag. I want my caffeine and my dignity intact. Thank you very much. You know what else should be banned? Strip searches based on phony drug dog signals. Here in Australia, police will bring these dogs to festivals, pubs, even train stations. The dogs will sit in front of someone, and just like that, the cops assume they've got a kilo of cocaine shoved in their sock. Most of the time, the dogs are wrong, but the humiliation sticks with you. Imagine minding your own business, trying to enjoy a beer with friends, and suddenly you're being hauled off to some back room, forced to strip down like you're auditioning for the worst reality TV show ever. No drugs found? Oh well, carry on with your night. No apology necessary. It's terrifying and degrading, and it needs to stop. Honestly, if the dogs are going to be this unreliable, we might as well replace them with coin flips. At least a 50-50th chance is better than what these pups are offering. Either that, or every time they get it wrong, the officers involved have to strip down too, just to make things fair. Let's see how eager they are to keep playing search and seize after that. In the grand scheme of things, life would be a whole lot better if we just banned all these absurd practices. No more lying news outlets, no more predatory churches, no more ghosting job candidates or robbing us with shrinkflation. It's like we're living in a society where everyone's trying to get one over on everyone else. And honestly, I am tired. I just want a world where things make sense, where fairness isn't a pipe dream, and you can trust that what you pay for is what you actually get. Until then, I guess we'll just keep calling out the nonsense, one ridiculous law at a time.